Shadow 1, you are cleared to engage. She exhaled once, slow, controlled. 40 enemy fighters had 12 Navy SEALs cornered in a canyon with no exit. 2 men bleeding and a helicopter still 25 minutes out. Nobody knew she was there. Nobody had authorized this, and she was already lining up the first shot. Captain Olivia Hayes pressed her cheek against the stock of her Barrett, steadied her breathing, and made a decision that would either save 12 lives or end her career, possibly both. She chose the shot, and the canyon below her changed forever. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel and follow every part to the end. Then drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The voice on the radio was calm. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. It was calm. The way a person gets calm when they've already accepted what's coming, when the math has been run and the fear has been burned away, and what's left is just the cold, clean arithmetic of survival. Every other voice on that frequency, and there were many, all of them trained, all of them elite, had an edge, a tightness. The sound of men who understood exactly how bad the situation was and were working very hard to pretend otherwise. But this voice was steady, and it belonged to a woman. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cole heard it and froze for exactly 1 second. 1 second that he would later describe as the strangest moment of his entire military career. Not because of the danger he was in, not because of the 2 men bleeding against the canyon wall behind him, not because of the 40 enemy fighters who had methodically closed every possible exit around his team over the previous 40 minutes, but because that voice, that single calm female voice on a restricted military frequency, was the first thing in the last hour that had genuinely surprised him. He had been surprised by a lot of things today. He had been surprised when the intelligence report that described a small enemy patrol turned out to be catastrophically, lethally wrong. He had been surprised when the first explosion sealed the rear exit of the canyon behind them before they even had a chance to consider retreat. He had been surprised when the helicopter support was grounded by weather and the radio operator told him with genuine apology in his voice that the earliest possible extraction was 25 minutes out. He had been surprised when 2 of his best men went down in the second assault. One with a wound to his thigh that was serious but manageable, and one with a wound to his shoulder that was serious and becoming less manageable by the minute. But this, a calm woman's voice on a channel that no unauthorized person should have been able to access from a position that no intelligence briefing had mentioned, identifying enemy positions with a specificity that suggested she had been watching the battlefield for longer than this fight had been happening. This was the surprise that cut through everything else. Shadow 1. Ethan said, keeping his own voice flat and professional, because that was what the moment required. This frequency is restricted. Identify yourself and your authorization level. Now. There was a brief pause. Not a nervous pause, a deliberate one. Captain Olivia Hayes, Intelligence Assessment Unit, Special Operations Support Group. I've been on an observation assignment in this grid for 72 hours. Ethan looked at his radio operator, Petty Officer 2nd Class Derek Marsh, who gave him a look that communicated everything that he had no idea who this person was, that her call sign appeared on no paperwork he had ever seen, and that he was equally divided between trusting her and treating her as a potential threat. Captain Hayes, Ethan said, who authorized your presence in this operational zone? That information is above your clearance level, Commander. The words landed like a slap. Around him. Several members of Viper Team heard it through their earpieces and turned to look at him. Rodriguez crouched behind a boulder with his rifle raised an eyebrow. Torres, the team medic, glanced up from where he was working on Specialist Briggs's shoulder wound and said nothing, but communicated plenty. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, who had 17 years of special operations experience, and had never in those 17 years been told that any piece of information was above his commander's clearance level, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a curse. Captain, Ethan said, I have 12 men in a canyon, 2 of them wounded, surrounded by approximately 40 enemy fighters, with coordinated machine gun coverage on every exit point. I do not have time for classification disputes. Tell me what you see. I know what you have, Olivia said. I've been watching them build this trap for 3 days. 3 days. Ethan registered the weight of that. Not hours, days. She had been out here alone watching while the intelligence analysts back at base were writing reports about small patrols and limited enemy presence. She had been watching while his team flew in on the assumption that this was a routine reconnaissance mission. She had been watching while 40 fighters carefully positioned themselves at every critical point in this canyon system and waited for someone to walk in. "Why didn't you report this?" Ethan asked, and he heard the controlled anger in his own voice and didn't try to suppress it. "I did report it," Olivia said, and now there was something in her voice, not anger, not defensiveness, but something harder and quieter. 3 times. To my chain of command. The intelligence was flagged as unverified and held for further analysis. The silence that followed that statement lasted about 2 seconds. Then Derek Marsh made a sound under his breath that was definitely a curse. Rodriguez said very quietly, "Are you serious?" Torres did not say anything at all. He had Briggs's shoulder open and his hands were busy, and he was focusing very deliberately on the things he could control. "All right," Ethan said, because there was nothing productive to be done with the fury that was building in his chest about a bureaucratic failure that had put his men in this canyon. Not right now, not while the enemy was still there and still moving and still probing the edges of their perimeter for weaknesses. "Tell me what you see," and she told him, she told him about the 3 machine gun positions, where they were, which ones had overlapping fields of fire, which one was the anchor of the entire system, and which ones were supporting elements. She told him about the enemy commander, a man she had been observing for 2 of the 3 days, how he communicated with his fighters, where he positioned himself during engagements, what pattern his tactical adjustments followed. She told him about the sniper positions on the cliff walls. How many there were, which one had the clearest angle on the main SEAL position, and which one was there primarily to cover the extraction routes. She told him all of this in the same calm, steady voice, and by the time she was done, Ethan had a clearer picture of the battlefield around him than he had possessed at any point since the ambush began. "You've been watching all of this for 3 days, he said. "Yes. From 900 meters east. Approximately. Alone." There was a fractional pause. "Yes." Ethan looked at Marcus Webb. Webb looked back at him. Something passed between them that didn't require words and acknowledgement that they were operating in a situation that had already discarded most of the normal rules, and that what was required now was not protocol, but judgment. "Shadow 1, Ethan said, "what are you carrying?" "Barrett M82, 11 rounds remaining. Can you reach all 3 machine gun positions from your current location?" "2 of them. The third is partially obscured. I'll need to relocate after the first 2, and the relocation will take approximately 4 minutes. And during those 4 minutes, you hold what you have and you don't move your wounded." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of operational reality, delivered without apology, and Ethan recognized it for what it was. Not arrogance, but the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who has done the math completely and isn't willing to compromise the result. "Shadow 1, he said, "you are cleared to engage." He heard a small controlled exhale through the radio. Nothing more. 30 seconds of silence. And then the canyon changed. The first shot came without warning. That was the part that Rodriguez would talk about later, when he had the distance to talk about it at all. Not the shot itself, not the result of the shot, but the absolute absence of warning. One moment, the machine gun on the north wall was churning out fire in controlled bursts, and the SEALs were pressed behind cover, and the situation had the particular quality of helplessness that sets in. When you're taking fire, you cannot effectively return. And then there was a single distant crack, a sound that barely registered above the noise of the firefight, and the machine gun stopped. Just stopped. Not paused. Not jammed. Stopped. Rodriguez looked at Torres. Torres looked at Rodriguez. Neither of them said anything for approximately 1 second. Then the second shot. The supporting machine gun on the west approach. The one that had been keeping Petty Officer Liu and Petty Officer Santos pinned behind a boulder. For the last 20 minutes went silent, in exactly the same way, a single distant crack. A cessation that seemed almost impossible, because machines like that don't just stop people. Stop them. And the closest person to that machine gun, who had the ability to stop it, was currently crouched somewhere on a ridge 900 meters away. Shadow 1 confirms 2, Olivia said over the radio. Relocating, 4 minutes. And then her radio went quiet. She's moving, Marcus Webb said to no one in particular. In the middle of a firefight, Rodriguez said. Moving and keeping radio silence, Webb said. The enemy noticed the silence too. That was the first indication that whoever had designed this ambush was not merely competent, but experienced within seconds of the second machine gun. Going quiet, the fighters began communicating, shifting, adjusting. They understood that something had changed. They did not yet know what or where it had come from, but they understood that the mathematical advantage they had constructed over the previous 3 days had just been reduced, and they responded the way trained fighters respond to unexpected threats by consolidating and repositioning. They're pulling back. Derek Marsh said, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man reporting something he doesn't entirely believe. Not pulling back, Ethan said. Regrouping. They're trying to find the angle. The angle on what? On her. The enemy was not retreating. They were reorganizing to hunt. And the woman they were hunting had just gone radio silent and was somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the canyon walls, moving to a new position with 11 rounds, now 9 rounds, and 4 minutes to get there. Ethan found himself doing something he almost never did during active engagements. He was worried about someone else's safety, not his team. His team was right here where he could see them and direct them and put himself between them and incoming fire, if it came to that. But Olivia Hayes was out there alone, moving silent in an operational zone that was now actively hostile to her presence, in a way it hadn't been when this fight started, because the enemy now knew that someone was picking them apart from a distance, and they were going to find that person, and they were going to kill her. Shadow 1, he said into the radio. Status. Silence. Shadow 1, acknowledge. Silence. Rodriguez was watching him. Webb was watching him. Even Torres' hand still working on Briggs had tilted his head slightly in a way that suggested he was listening. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after Olivia's last transmission, her voice came back. Shadow 1 in position. The third gun is active on your eastern approach. I have a partial angle. Stand by. Ethan exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. The third shot was different. Not in sound. The distant crack was the same. A sound that already felt familiar in the way that sounds associated with salvation tend to become familiar very quickly. But in result, the third shot produced something neither of the first two had movement. The enemy machine gun on the eastern approach did not simply stop. It stopped, and then the fighters around it, 3 of them visible for a moment, as they scrambled away from a position that had just become lethal, broke cover and ran. Not retreating in good order, running. Because something had found them that they could not see, could not locate, could not return fire against, and whatever training they had did not include how to stand your ground against an enemy you cannot identify. Eagle actual, Olivia said. All 3 gun positions are neutralized. I'm tracking their commander. He's at your 9 o'clock 60 meters, using the rock formation for cover. Ethan processed this. Their commander. The man Olivia had been watching for 2 days. Can you reach him? Not from this position. The angle is wrong, but he's directing the repositioning now. If he gets his fighters organized in the next 5 minutes, they'll push your north wall with a flanking element, and you won't have the coverage to stop them. What do you need? Nothing. I need you to move your team 15 meters toward the East Canyon wall, right now. That puts us in the open for 30 seconds. It puts you in the open for 30 seconds and gives me the angle I need. The alternative is staying where you are and dealing with a flanking movement in approximately 5 minutes. Ethan turned to Marcus Webb. Webb was already looking at him. She hasn't been wrong yet, Webb said, which was the entire argument. Which was, Ethan realized the most complete endorsement that Marcus Webb, 17 years 3 combat tours, more collective operational experience than anyone else in this canyon was capable of offering to someone he had never met. Viper team, Ethan said. We're moving, east wall, 15 meters, fast and low. Torres Briggs goes with you. On me, Torres said, getting an arm under Briggs, who was conscious and moving, but moving slowly. Shadow 1, Ethan said. We're moving in 30 seconds. I'm ready. They moved. 30 seconds of exposure of open ground of the particular terror that comes from abandoning cover during an active engagement. Briggs made a sound when Torres moved him, a sharp, involuntary grunt that he controlled almost immediately, the sound of a professional managing pain rather than surrendering to it. They reached the East Canyon wall. Everyone made it. And 3 seconds later, from somewhere on a ridge that none of them had laid eyes on, Captain Olivia Hayes fired, and the enemy commander ceased to be a factor. There is a particular silence that falls over a battlefield when the person directing the opposing force is removed. It's not peace, it's not safety. It's a specific, recognizable quality of confusion. The sound of a machine whose controller has been disconnected, still running, but no longer purposeful, moving on momentum rather than direction. Ethan had experienced it before in other places, other fights, and he recognized it now. The enemy fighters were still there, still armed, still dangerous. But they had just lost their organizing intelligence. They're fragmenting, Rodriguez said, peering around the edge of a boulder. I count 6, 7, they're not covering each other anymore. Don't engage unless you have to, Ethan said. We're buying time, not winning a firefight. Eagle Actual, Olivia's voice said. I'm tracking 2 separate groups trying to establish new positions. Northeast of your location, 8 fighters moving to the ridge. Southwest, 5 fighters moving toward your medical position. Torres looked up. The Southwest group, Ethan said immediately. Those are the priority. I know, Olivia said. Another shot. The Southwest group lost its point man. The remaining 4 stopped. They're reconsidering, Rodriguez said. Give them something to reconsider, Ethan said, and Rodriguez understood, and the sharp crack of a seal-fired rifle joined the suddenly busy acoustic landscape of the canyon as the remaining group was reminded that the people they were hunting had teeth of their own. The group broke. Northeast group is still moving, Olivia reported. They're trying to find my position. 8 fighters ridge approach, they'll crest in approximately 3 minutes. Ethan did the math. 8 fighters on a ridge closing on a lone sniper who had been firing continuously and whose position they were now actively hunting. Even with the best concealment in the world, a prolonged engagement from a fixed position eventually resulted in that position being identified. Olivia had already relocated once. She might relocate again. Shadow 1, Ethan said, can you move? If I move, I lose my angle on your extraction approach. What extraction approach? Our extraction point is covered. It was, she said. The Northeast group isn't trying to find me. They're trying to loop around and set up at the canyon exit before your helicopter arrives. Ethan stared at the canyon wall. They know about the extraction. Someone told them the general timeline, Olivia said. 25 minutes. They're working with that. They have a flanking team. I watched them brief it 40 minutes ago. This ambush always had 2 phases. Phase 1 was here. Phase 2 is at your exit. The information settled over the canyon like a temperature drop. Around Ethan, Viper team absorbed it. They had beaten the first phase. With help. They hadn't known they had, with firepower from a source they hadn't known existed. They had survived what should have been the final minutes of their lives. And there was a second phase waiting for them. How many? Ethan asked. 15 fighters, already pre-positioned. The group moving northeast is going to link up with them. Shadow 1. Ethan kept his voice level. You are telling me that our extraction point is currently held by 15 enemy fighters with more on the way? Yes. And you are currently the only Overwatch asset we have? Yes. With, he did the math. 6 rounds remaining. A pause. 5. She had fired again while he was talking. Captain Hayes, Marcus Webb said quietly, and the use of her rank rather than her call sign was something that Ethan registered and would remember. Are you telling us you can clear a 15-man position with 5 rounds? Olivia's answer came back without hesitation, without drama, without any of the self-conscious performance that the question might have invited. I'm telling you, I've handled worse. Webb looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the rest of Viper Team. In the expressions of 12 men, 11 with Briggs currently horizontal, he read the full range of responses: skepticism, calculation, hope. The specific kind of trust that forms not from familiarity or reputation, but from direct observed evidence of competence under pressure. They had watched her dismantle an entire ambush. They had watched her think 3 moves ahead of an organized enemy. They had watched her manage her position, her ammunition, her communication, and her tactical picture simultaneously alone on a ridge for the duration of a firefight that would have been exceptional for a full team. Whatever they had expected when they came to this canyon today, it had not been this. Whatever Olivia Hayes was, whatever classification surrounded her unit, whatever bureaucratic failure had buried the intelligence she'd spent 3 days gathering, she had shown them with the absolute clarity of demonstrated performance exactly who she was. Shadow 1. Ethan said, "You are authorized to act on your own judgment. What do you need from us?" The answer surprised him. 12 minutes. And noise. I need the enemy paying attention to you while I move. You want us to draw fire, Rodriguez said flatly. Controlled return fire. Make them think you're pushing out. Give me time to get into position before the northeast group links up with the main element. Ethan looked at his team. At Rodriguez, who was already checking his ammunition. At Webb, who was already identifying the angles. At Torres, who had finished with Briggs and was now picking up his own rifle with the quiet efficiency of a man who had always known this wasn't over. At Briggs himself, pale and propped against the canyon wall, who managed to say, "I can cover left," in a voice that left no room for argument. 12 minutes, Ethan said. 11 now, Olivia said. Shadow 1, you have 11 minutes. We'll make noise. And for the first time since the ambush began, since the first explosion sealed the exit, and the machine guns opened up, and the day went from routine to catastrophic. In the span of 30 seconds, Ethan Cole felt the balance shift, not to safety, not to certainty, but toward something. The enemy had spent 3 days building a trap. They had positioned 40 fighters. They had planned 2 phases. They had prepared for every contingency that their intelligence and their experience had told them to prepare for. They had not prepared for Captain Olivia Hayes. And right now, with 11 minutes on the clock and 5 rounds in her magazine, she was moving through the dark above them, toward a position that 15 armed men did not know existed to dismantle an ambush that no one in this canyon except her had even known was waiting. Viper Team, Ethan said, give her the noise she needs. And the canyon came alive. The next 11 minutes were not quiet. Viper Team pushed controlled fire in 3 directions simultaneously, not recklessly, not wastefully, but purposefully, creating the impression of a team attempting a breakout while managing their ammunition with the discipline of people who knew they could not afford to run dry. The enemy responded. Of course they did. 40 fighters had become fewer, but the ones who remained were experienced, and they recognized an aggressive posture, and they met it. The canyon walls echoed. Briggs fired left as promised from his position against the canyon wall with Torres's hand on his shoulder to brace him against the recoil that his wound made more punishing than usual. He didn't complain. He fired controlled effective shots that kept a flanking element from forming on the western approach, and he did not say a word about the cost of doing so. Rodriguez worked the north approach with Webb trading shots in a pattern that kept the enemy uncertain about how many shooters they were facing. Webb had 17 years of experience, and Rodriguez had 9, and together they created the impression of a larger, more aggressive force than 12 men in a box with limited ammunition had any right to project. Ethan ran the radio. He tracked the helicopter. He counted the minutes. At 9 minutes, Olivia's voice came back. In position. 2 words. The most welcome 2 words Ethan had heard since the ambush began. Clear for engagement, he asked. Stand by. 30 seconds. Then the firing started from somewhere new. The extraction point. Not from the enemy. Not incoming. Going out. Olivia had found her angle. Eagle actual, she said between shots, her voice carrying the steady rhythm of someone managing a complex calculation in real time. I count 14. I have a partial visual on the commander of this element. If you can start moving your team toward the exit in 90 seconds, I can create the window." "You said 15, Ethan said. "One of them relocated. He's watching the ridge. He knows someone is there. Don't stop moving once you start." "Understood. And Commander Hayes, your wounded man. He needs a surgeon, not a field dressing. Don't slow down for anything." The professional clarity of it. The absence of sentiment. The complete focus on the operational reality was somehow more reassuring than comfort would have been. She wasn't telling him things would be fine. She was telling him what to do. 90 seconds, Ethan said. "Viper team, prepare to move. We are going to the exit. Fast. No stopping. Torres Briggs is on you." "Got him," Torres said. "Webb, you have rear." "Always do," Webb said. "Rodriguez, Los Santos, you have flanks. Anyone who tries to cut us off, you discourage them." Rodriguez said something in Spanish that Ethan chose not to translate. "Shadow 1. Ethan said, "We move in 90 seconds. Talk to us." "I'm talking," Olivia said. And she was. As the seconds counted down, her voice was a steady presence on the radio, calling positions, tracking movements, adjusting her assessment in real time as the enemy element at the extraction point reacted to fire coming from a direction they hadn't covered. They were good fighters, and they responded fast, but they were responding to what had already happened, and Olivia was already on to what came next. 40 seconds, she said. Ethan looked at his team. 12 faces, 11 mobile, 1 being prepared to move. Exhausted, some of them. Carrying the weight of the last hour in the set of their jaws and the steadiness of their hands, and the kind of focused calm that comes not from the absence of fear, but from the choice to act despite it. These were the best in the world at what they did, and none of them had ever expected to be here alive because of a woman on a ridge they couldn't see. 20 seconds. Ethan squared his shoulders. "Viper team," he said. "Shadow 1 is clearing the exit. We go on her signal, and we do not stop." He heard 12 acknowledgements, 11 voices, and 1 thumbs up from Briggs. 10 seconds, Olivia said, and then, "Move, now." They moved, and the world came apart around them. The moment. Viper team broke cover. The remaining enemy fighters, scattered, leaderless, but still dangerous. The way a wounded animal is still dangerous, responded with everything they had left. Fire came from 3 directions simultaneously. Not coordinated fire. Desperate fire. The kind of shooting that happens when trained men are operating without a commander, when the tactical picture has collapsed, and what's left is instinct and anger, and the determination to inflict damage before the moment is completely gone. Ethan ran. He ran the way he had been trained to run under fire. Low, fast, directional, with his mind doing 2 things at once, tracking his own movement and tracking the 11 people around him. Torres had Briggs half-carried, half-dragged in a grip that was somewhere between a tackle and an embrace, moving faster than anyone had any right to expect, given what Briggs had in his shoulder. Rodriguez was on the left flank, firing short, controlled bursts that were less about hitting targets and more about keeping heads down. Webb was behind them all, walking backward, putting himself between the team and anything chasing them. "Shadow 1. Ethan said into the radio without breaking stride. "We are moving. Talk to me." "I see you," Olivia said. 2 fighters your right side, 30 meters. They're trying to cut the angle." Rodriguez. "I've got it," Rodriguez said before Ethan finished saying his name. He didn't watch what Rodriguez did next. He didn't have to. He heard it. "One runner," Olivia said. "He's falling back. Let him go." "Northeast," Ethan said. "Still clear. I put down 2 of the linker group. The remaining 6 scattered when their link point disappeared. They don't have a rally position anymore." 6 fighters without a rally position were 6 fighters who were dangerous but unfocused. And unfocused was survivable in a way that coordinated was not. Ethan registered this and filed it and kept running. 40 meters to the exit. 30. Briggs made a sound behind him. A sharp, involuntary noise that was not a word and not a scream, but something in between. The sound of someone hitting the absolute limit of what the body will absorb before it starts issuing notices. Torres said something to him low and fast, and Briggs's next sound was controlled, forced back down into something manageable. 20 meters. "Commander," Olivia said, and something in her voice made Ethan's stride hitch for a fraction of a second. Not fear, not alarm, but a change in register that he had already learned to read. "Single shooter, elevated position, left of your exit. I didn't see him before. He was covering from below and he moved." "Can you reach him?" A half-second pause. "Not from where I am." 10 meters. "How long to reposition?" "Longer than you have." Ethan processed this in the approximately 2 seconds available to him. A shooter he couldn't see in an elevated position, he couldn't identify covering an exit he was committed to reaching. Behind him, 11 people including 2 wounded. Ahead of him, an unknown angle. "Webb," he said. "Already working on it," Webb said from behind him. "And Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. 17 years of special operations. 3 combat tours, the most experienced man in the canyon, by a margin that wasn't close." Marcus Webb did what Marcus Webb had always done in moments that required someone to step into the space between a threat and the people he was responsible for. He identified the angle. He shifted his position by 4 steps. He fired once. The elevated shooter did not fire again. "Clear," Webb said in a voice like he was reporting the weather. They hit the exit running. The canyon walls opened. The compressed, echo-amplified roar of the firefight changed character, instantly spreading out, diffusing, losing the concentrated intensity that canyon acoustics had given it for the last hour. They were out. Not safe. Out. "Shadow 1, Ethan said, and he was breathing hard now, the full physical weight of the last hour landing on his body. The way it always does, when the immediate crisis releases its grip slightly, and the body remembers that it has been running on pure adrenaline, and it would very much like to collect on that debt. Status on the extraction point. 11 fighters remaining at the secondary position, Olivia said. I have eyes on them. They've heard the movement. They know you're coming. 11 fighters, prepared position, between them and the landing zone. Helicopter ETA, Ethan asked Derek Marsh. 12 minutes, Marsh said. 12 minutes. 11 fighters. And a woman on a ridge with Ethan did the math 4 rounds left. Shadow 1. He said, I need options. I'm already working on them, Olivia said. Give me 60 seconds and stay where you are. We can't stay in the open. You're not in the open. You have rock cover on your left 8 meters. Get there. Ethan looked left. Rock cover 8 meters. She was right. He hadn't seen it from his current angle. Move left, he told the team. 8 meters. Cover. They moved. They reached it. They compressed into the available space with the practiced economy of people who had done this before, fitting 12 bodies into the shelter that most people would have considered appropriate for 4. Briggs went down on his good side without being asked, making himself horizontal because vertical was no longer a reasonable option, and because horizontal was not defeat. It was tactics, and Briggs understood tactics even when his body was trying to betray him. Cover. Torres confirmed, already kneeling over Briggs again. Shadow 1. Ethan said, 60 seconds started 30 seconds ago. I know, Olivia said. I'm counting too. What happened in the next 90 seconds was something that Petty Officer First Class Daniel Rodriguez would describe in various forms for the rest of his life to his wife, to his children. When they were old enough, to younger operators who asked what it was like to be in a fight that went wrong in every direction at once, and then somehow went right. He would describe the way the rock cover felt when he pressed against it. The way Briggs smelled like blood and sweat, and the particular sharp chemical scent of a wound that had been field-dressed but not properly treated. The way Marcus Webb's breathing was completely even and controlled, when Rodriguez's own breathing was still coming down from a sprint that his body was not going to forgive quickly. He would describe the silence that fell over the team during those 90 seconds. Not quiet, because the world was still noisy, still full of the residue of a firefight that hadn't fully ended. But silent in the team. Silent in the specific way of people who are waiting for something they cannot control, and have placed their trust in someone they cannot see. And he would describe the moment Olivia Hayes' voice came back over the radio. "Eagle Actual," she said, "I have a problem." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Talk to me." The shooter Webb engaged. He wasn't alone. There are 2 men with him. They were below his position. I couldn't see them. They've moved to a position that covers the approach to the landing zone, and they have an angle I can't reach from anywhere I can be in the next 12 minutes. The team heard it. Every person pressed against that rock face heard the calculation that Olivia was delivering in real time, and they heard what it meant. The landing zone was covered. The helicopter was 12 minutes out, and the person who had been clearing their path was telling them she had found a wall she couldn't breach. "Options," Ethan said immediately. "The fighters at the secondary position are going to hear the helicopter. When they do, they're going to move, and the 2 covering the LZ approach are going to know exactly where to look. Your window is approximately 30 seconds from the moment the helicopter makes contact." 30 seconds isn't a window, Rodriguez said quietly, not into the radio, just into the air. "It's enough if they're looking somewhere else when you move," Olivia said, and Rodriguez realized she had heard him somehow ambient noise pickup on the radio probably, and he felt something he would later identify as being simultaneously embarrassed and impressed. "What makes them look somewhere else?" Ethan asked. A pause. Not long. 2 seconds at most. But Ethan had already spent enough time on the radio with Olivia Hayes to know that a 2-second pause from her meant something specific. It meant she was deciding whether to say the thing she was about to say. "I do," she said. The air changed. Not literally. But the quality of attention in the team shifted in a way that was almost physical, a collective focusing that happened without any of them choosing it. "Explain," Ethan said. "If I relocate to the South Ridge and I can get there in approximately 9 minutes, I have a direct line of sight to the LZ approach. I cannot reach the 2 shooters from that position because of their elevation. But from that position I can make myself visible, briefly." "You're talking about revealing your location," Ethan said. "I'm talking about drawing their attention for 30 seconds so your team can reach the LZ. The implications of this arranged themselves very quickly in Ethan's mind. Drawing attention meant she would be a target. Being a target at close range closer than the 900 meters she'd been working from meant she was in danger in a way she hadn't been at any point during the previous hour when her concealment and distance had been her protection. Making herself visible to 2 trained fighters in an elevated position with clear sight lines was not a tactical maneuver. It was a sacrifice. "Negative," Ethan said. "Find another option." "Commander." "That's not a discussion, Captain. Find another option." Silence. Webb was looking at Ethan. Not speaking, just looking with the particular expression of a man who respects the decision, but has not yet finished evaluating it. "There isn't one," Olivia said, and her voice was the same steady, factual, clinical in its precision. "I've run the geometry 4 times. The only position that puts me in range of that approach requires me to be visible from their location. I've accepted that." "I haven't," Ethan said. "With respect, Commander, it's not yours to accept." The words hit the rock face, and everyone heard them. Rodriguez looked at his boots. Torres kept his hands on Briggs and his eyes on Ethan. Webb continued his surveillance of the surrounding terrain with the steady, sweeping attention of a man who believes that the argument happening on the radio is important, but that the terrain is more immediate. Ethan took one breath. "Hayes," he said, dropping the call sign, dropping the rank, stripping it back to the most direct form of address available. "If you reveal your position to those 2 shooters and they are faster than you need them to be, you die." "Yes," she said. "And if I don't, there's a reasonable probability that 1 or more of your team dies reaching that LZ. I know which outcome I can live with." The silence after that sentence lasted 4 seconds. Then Marcus Webb said quietly but clearly, "She's right, Commander." Ethan turned to look at him. Webb met his gaze and did not flinch. "She's right," he said again. "And she knows it. And she's already decided. The only question is whether we use the window she's offering, or whether we waste it arguing." Ethan stared at Webb. He thought about 12 men. He thought about Briggs horizontal behind him, who needed a surgeon and was not going to get one in this canyon. He thought about the helicopter, That was now. He looked at Marsh 9 minutes out. I thought about a woman on a ridge who had spent 3 days gathering intelligence that was ignored, who had spent the last hour keeping 12 people alive from a position no one knew about, who was now calmly offering to step into a line of fire so that those 12 people could walk to a helicopter. Shadow 1, he said. Eagle Actual. You have 9 minutes. When you're in position, you give me 3 words, I am ready. That's your signal and my acknowledgement. After that, you do what you have to do, and I need you to understand something. A pause. Go ahead, she said. You are coming home. Whatever happens at that LZ, you are on that helicopter. That is an order. A beat. Then, for the first time in the entire engagement, something changed in Olivia Hayes' voice. Not much. A small shift in texture, almost imperceptible. The kind of thing that only registers when you have been listening to a voice for an hour under conditions that sharpen every sensory input to a fine edge. Understood, she said, and she was gone. The 9 minutes that followed were the longest of Ethan Cole's career, and he had spent 17 years accumulating long minutes. He ran the radio. He coordinated with Marsh on helicopter positioning, working out the approach angle and the ground signals, and the sequence of events that needed to happen in a very specific order for this to work. He talked to his team, not speeches, not motivational language, just operational information delivered in the flat functional voice of a commander who is fully in control of the things he can control and has committed consciously and completely to trusting the things he cannot. Rodriguez cleaned and reloaded. Webb maintained his observation quiet and complete. Torres worked on Briggs, who had stopped making sounds of any kind, which was either better or worse than the sounds he'd been making before, and Torres's expression did not reveal which. Liu and Santos covered the rear approach with the focused economical attention of 2 operators who had worked together long enough that they communicated in glances and small movements and the occasional 2-word exchange that carried the weight of a full conversation. Derek Marsh kept his eyes on his equipment and called out the helicopter ETA at regular intervals. 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and then at 2 minutes and 40 seconds to helicopter contact, the radio came alive. I am ready. 3 words. Ethan felt them in his chest. Eagle Actual copies, he said. Viper team on my mark. We move to the LZ on Shadow 1's engagement. Fast and together. Nobody stops. Nobody separates. Torres, you and Briggs have Webb and Rodriguez on either side. Liu Santos, you have the rear. Marsh, you're on comms with the helicopter. The moment they touch, we load. Everyone clear. 11 acknowledgements. 1 thumbs up from Briggs. Ethan keyed the radio one more time. Shadow 1, execute. They heard it before they saw the effect. Not Olivia's shot. She was too far away, the acoustic signature of her rifle too, dispersed at this distance to register clearly above the background noise. What they heard was the response. The 2 shooters covering the LZ approach, whoever they were, wherever their training had come from, they heard something on the south ridge that demanded their attention, and they gave it. Move, Ethan said. And Viper team moved. 40 meters of open ground between their position and the LZ. The helicopter was visible now, coming in from the east, fast and low, the pilot doing exactly what good helicopter pilots do in contested environments, minimizing exposure time by minimizing altitude and maximizing speed and trusting the people on the ground to be where they said they'd be. 20 meters. No fire from the LZ approach. Olivia was holding their attention. Whatever she was doing on that south ridge, it was working, and Ethan did not allow himself to think about what it was costing her to make it work. 10 meters. The helicopter flared. Skids hit the ground. Load, 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 Ethan said, and the team compressed into the loading sequence with practiced efficiency. Wounded first Webb and Rodriguez handling Briggs, while Torres guided his trajectory and kept his shoulder from catching anything on the door frame. Then the rest of the team in rapid succession, each person moving in and collapsing their footprint and making room for the next. Ethan was last. He stood at the edge of the helicopter, one hand on the frame, and keyed his radio. Shadow 1, fall back to LZ, Now. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. Shadow 1, acknowledge. Then her voice came back, and it was different. Not the clinical steadiness of the previous hour. Something tighter. More controlled in the specific way that things are controlled when the effort of control is visible. One of them got to cover, she said. I don't have a clear shot. He's between me and the LZ. Ethan's hand tightened on the doorframe. Hayes, the helicopter is on the ground. We are loaded. We are waiting for you. He'll fire the moment I move toward you. Then I need you to not be where he expects you to be when you move. A pause. Commander, I appreciate the tactical suggestion, but... It's not a suggestion, Ethan said. I told you, you are on this helicopter. Tell me where he is. Silence. Then Webb's hand landed on Ethan's shoulder, and when Ethan turned, Webb was already raising his rifle, already at the door, and his expression was the expression of a man who had 17 years of experience with exactly this kind of geometry and had already located the solution. Where? Webb said into the radio quietly like a question between colleagues. Rock formation, Olivia said. South of the LZ, 30 meters. He's on the left side using the overhang for cover. I see it, Webb said. He fired twice. Move, he said into the radio. Move right now. And Captain Olivia Hayes came out of the terrain. That was how Rodriguez described it later. She came out of the terrain like something the ground had been holding and chose to release. She was running low and fast with her rifle across her body and her eyes forward, covering the ground between her last position and the helicopter, in a sprint that was driven by something beyond the mechanical, the absolute focused singular purpose of a person who has made every other decision already, and the only decision left is to run. She hit the door. Rodriguez and Lou grabbed her, and she was inside, and Webb was inside, and Ethan was inside, and the helicopter was moving before the door was fully closed. For a moment, nobody spoke. The helicopter climbed. The canyon, the machine guns, the 40 fighters, the 3 days of intelligence gathering, the hour of the most precise shooting anyone on Viper Team had ever witnessed. Firsthand, all of it fell away below them. Briggs said from where he was horizontal against the far wall, in a voice that was more breath than sound. Is she in? She's in, Torres said. Briggs closed his eyes. Ethan looked at Olivia. She was sitting against the opposite wall, her rifle across her knees, her breathing coming down from the sprint. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, fresh, not deep, but bleeding in the distracting way of head wounds. She had not mentioned it. She was looking out the window at the terrain below with an expression that was difficult to read, that existed somewhere between exhaustion and something else, something more private. She did not look like what any of them had expected. She did not look like a superhero or a legend, or any of the things that the hour they had just survived might have suggested she should look like. She looked like a person who had spent 3 days on a ridge and 1 hour making decisions that no one should have had to make alone, and who was now sitting in a helicopter and allowing herself for the first time to not be making decisions. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the only thing that felt honest, I didn't get you killed. She turned from the window and looked at him. No, she said. You didn't. I told you that you were coming home. You did. I make a habit of keeping my word. Something moved across her face. Not a smile, not quite. Something quieter than a smile, something that carried more weight. So do I, she said. She looked back out the window, and the helicopter flew east away from the canyon, away from the 40 fighters who had built a trap that one woman had spent 3 days studying and 40 minutes dismantling, away from everything that had happened in the last few hours in a piece of Afghan mountain terrain that none of them would ever fully leave behind. The debrief happened 3 hours later at the forward operating base in a room that smelled like coffee and concrete, with a Colonel Ethan had never liked much, and a JAG officer he had never met, and 2 people from the Intelligence Directorate who arrived with sealed folders and expressions that suggested they were there to contain something rather than understand it. The colonel's name was Hargrove, Gerald Hargrove. He sat at the head of the table with his uniform exactly correct and his expression carefully neutral, which was how Ethan had learned to identify the specific type of senior officer who had already decided what the outcome of a meeting was going to be before the meeting started. Commander Cole Hargrove said, "Walk me through the engagement." Ethan walked him through it. How was precise? He was factual. He omitted nothing, and he editorialized nothing. He described the intelligence failure, the 40 fighters versus the predicted small patrol. He described the ambush, the wounded, the blocked extraction route, the helicopter delay. He described the radio contact with an unknown call sign and the decision to authorize engagement. He described what Olivia Hayes had done. He described it completely and without embellishment, because the truth did not need embellishment, and because the people in this room needed to understand exactly what had happened in that canyon and why it had ended the way it did. When he finished, Hargrove looked at the two Intelligence Directorate people. One of them, a man in his 40s with a nondescript quality that Ethan associated with people who made careers out of not being remembered, opened one of his sealed folders. "Captain Hayes' assignment in that operational zone," Hargrove said to the folder man, "was observation only. She was explicitly prohibited from engagement." The folder man nodded. "And yet she engaged," Hargrove said. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Without authorization from her chain of command." "She requested authorization from the ranking officer present at the point of engagement," Ethan said. "That was me. I authorized it." "You don't have the authority to authorize a classified intelligence asset to break operational protocols, Commander." "With respect, sir, I had 12 men in a canyon, 2 of them wounded with 40 enemy fighters and no air support. My authority in that moment was the authority of the officer responsible for those lives, and I used it. I would make the same decision again." Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Olivia, who was sitting 3 chairs down the table in clean clothes with a field dressing above her left eyebrow, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Her posture precise, and her expression, the same controlled steadiness that Ethan had heard in her voice all afternoon. "Captain Hayes," Hargrove said, "you were given explicit orders." "Yes, sir." "You violated those orders. I assessed that the tactical situation required immediate action to prevent the loss of 12 Special Operations personnel, sir. I made the judgment call that a field officer in my position was authorized to make under imminent threat conditions. I stand by that assessment." "You revealed a classified observation program." "I revealed my position to a friendly call sign who was in immediate danger of being overrun. The enemy was aware of my presence within 60 seconds of my first engagement, sir." Whatever the observation program's cover status was before the engagement, it was functionally compromised the moment their fighters began searching for an unknown sniper. My choice was between maintaining cover and watching 12 people die, or breaking cover and changing the outcome. I made a choice I believe any officer in my position should have made. The room was quiet. The JAG officer was writing something. The folder man was looking at his folder. Hargrove was looking at Olivia with the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. "Your intelligence reports," Ethan said into the silence, because the silence needed to be filled with something specific. "The reports Captain Hayes submitted 3 times in the 72 hours before this engagement. About the 40 fighters, about the 2-phase ambush, about the extraction point compromise. Those reports were flagged as unverified and held for further analysis." Hargrove turned to look at him. "If those reports had been acted on," Ethan said, "my team would not have been in that canyon at all. The engagement wouldn't have happened. 2 of my men wouldn't be in the medical bay right now. And we would not be sitting in this room discussing whether Captain Hayes' decision to keep 12 people alive violated protocol." Another silence. A longer one. The folder man closed his folder. Hargrove looked at the table, and Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, who was sitting at the far end of the table and who had not spoken a single word during the entire debrief, said in a voice that was completely conversational and completely unmistakable, "Sir, if it would be helpful, I can provide a written account of every decision Captain Hayes made during the engagement. Every shot, every call, every assessment. I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've worked with some very good people. I would be honored to document what I observed today." Hargrove looked at Webb. Webb looked back at him with the particular expression of a man who has 17 years of credibility and is spending some of it right now, deliberately in full awareness of what he's doing. Hargrove said nothing. Webb said nothing more. The offer stood in the room like an open door, and everyone understood that Webb's written account from a senior chief with 17 years and 3 tours would be a document that could not be easily dismissed or filed away. The debrief ended 20 minutes later without resolution, which was not unusual. Resolution in these situations rarely happened in the room where the initial conversation took place. They happened in other rooms, in other conversations, in the careful process of institutional machinery, trying to catch up with events that had already occurred, and outcomes that could not be undone. But as they filed out of the debrief room, Ethan Webb Rodriguez, all of Viper Team, and Olivia Hayes walking at the end with her rifle case and her field dressing and her precise controlled posture, Rodriguez fell into step beside her. He walked with her for about 20 meters without saying anything. Then he said, "That room. Those guys with the folders." "Yes," Olivia said. "They're not going to let this go easily." "I know. Does that bother you?" She was quiet for a moment. "What bothers me," she said, "is that I submitted 3 reports, 40 fighters, 2-phase ambush, extraction point compromise, 3 reports, 72 hours, and someone read them and decided they needed further analysis." Rodriguez said nothing. "That bothers me," Olivia said. "The room with the folders that I can handle." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said. "Webb's writing that account, and Webb's account is not something people ignore." "I know, and for what else it's worth." He stopped walking. She stopped too, turned to look at him. He held her gaze with the particular directness of a man who has decided to say something and has decided to say it completely. "I've been doing this for 9 years. I've been in firefights on 4 continents. I've worked with the best shooters in the world." He paused. "I have never seen anything like what you did today. Not once." Olivia looked at him. For a moment she said nothing. "Then, I was doing my job." "No," Rodriguez said gently but clearly. "You were doing ours." He walked back toward the team. She stood alone for a moment in the corridor outside the debrief room, rifle case in hand, field dressing above her eyebrow, the particular stillness of a person who has been moving and deciding and executing for the better part of 4 days and has arrived suddenly at a moment where no one is asking anything of her. She thought about the 3 reports. She thought about the 40 fighters and the canyon and the 2 men bleeding. She thought about 11 minutes and 5 rounds and a geometry problem on a south ridge in the dark. And then she thought about Hargrove's face when Webb made his offer. And something in her chest, something that had been very tightly wound for a very long time, loosened just slightly, just enough. She picked up her rifle case and walked toward the medical bay. Briggs needed a surgeon, but he was alive. They were all alive. And tomorrow, the institution was going to have to decide what to do about the fact that one woman on a ridge had just demonstrated in terms that could not be argued with what 3 ignored intelligence reports and 1 impossible hour looked like when they were finally taken seriously. That conversation, she knew, was not going to be comfortable for the people who had done the ignoring. She found she was entirely at peace with that. Briggs was out of surgery in 4 hours. The surgeon, a major named Kellen, who had been doing this long enough that she delivered news the way other people delivered weather reports, factual and without performance, found Ethan in the corridor outside the medical bay and told him the shoulder was clean. No arterial involvement, 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, full function expected. Ethan said thank you. He meant it more completely than he had meant anything in recent memory. I went back to the team room, where Viper Team had arranged themselves in the specific way of people who are too wired to sleep and too exhausted to do anything useful. Rodriguez cleaning gear. He had already cleaned twice. Webb sitting with his back against the wall, writing something in longhand in a small notebook. Lou and Santos playing cards with the focused silence of men who are playing cards to have something to do with their hands. Marsh running diagnostics on equipment that did not need diagnostics. Ethan sat down. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Rodriguez, without looking up from his rifle, said, "The intel shop sent someone over while you were with the surgeon." Ethan looked at him. What did they want? They wanted our radio logs from the engagement. And Marsh told them the request needed to go through you. Ethan looked at Marsh. Marsh shrugged with the particular economy of a man who considers following correct procedure to be its own complete explanation. They also asked about Shadow 1, Rodriguez said. Specifically, they asked how long we'd been working with her and who our point of contact was for her unit. What did you tell them? Rodriguez looked up for the first time. I told them I'd never heard of Shadow 1 before today. Which was true. Which was also, Ethan understood exactly the right thing to say to a room full of people who had arrived with sealed folders 40 minutes after a life-or-death engagement and were asking questions that sounded less like an after-action review and more like an accounting. Webb, Ethan said. Webb didn't look up from his notebook. Already writing it. All of it. Every shot, every call, every timeline. The 3 reports she filed. The 40 fighters versus the predicted small patrol. The extraction point compromise she identified 72 hours before the engagement. He paused. The part where someone decided that intelligence needed further analysis. The room was quiet. That last part, Ethan said. Especially that last part, Webb said. Olivia's debrief. With her own chain of command, happened the same evening in a separate building in a room she had sat in before, under different circumstances. The officer across the table was Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Soren, who ran the Special Operations Support Group's Intelligence Assessment Division, and who had, in Olivia's experience, 2 modes: efficient and concerned. Tonight, she was operating in a 3rd mode that Olivia had not previously observed, which could be described as carefully, deliberately neutral in the way of someone who has received information from multiple directions and is waiting for the full picture before committing to a position. Your reports, Soren said. Tell me about the process. 3 submissions over 72 hours, Olivia said. First report outlined the enemy force composition. 40 fighters organized structure-coordinated positions, suggesting pre-planned ambush. Second report detailed the 2-phase operational plan and identified the extraction point as a target. Third report included updated position data and a specific recommendation that any special operations activity in that grid be suspended pending further assessment. And the flags on those reports: unverified intelligence, requiring further analysis. Soren looked at her. Who flagged them? The submission system flags automatically based on source classification. My observation assignment is classified at a level that routes reports through a secondary verification process before they reach operational planning. Olivia paused. The secondary verification process has a 48-hour standard review window. Soren's expression did not change, but something behind it did. The first report was submitted 72 hours before the engagement, Soren said. Yes, ma'am. The 48-hour window would have cleared it. 24 hours before the engagement, yes. Olivia kept her voice level, at which point it would have reached operational planning with sufficient time to modify or cancel the reconnaissance mission. Instead, it was still in the secondary verification queue when the mission launched. The silence that settled into the room was the kind of silence that has weight. Soren looked at the table. She was a good officer. Olivia had always thought so. She was the kind of officer who understood that institutional failures were not abstractions. They were mechanisms that produced specific concrete outcomes, and those outcomes had names and personnel files, and in some cases, surgical reports. The verification queue, Soren said. Who manages it? Major Dennis Farlow, Olivia said. Intelligence Review Section. Soren wrote the name down. She wrote it carefully, pressing slightly harder than necessary, the pen moving with the deliberate quality of a person, making sure the impression transfers. Captain Hayes, Soren said. What you did today, the engagement, you understand the position it puts this program in. Yes, ma'am. The observation assignment exists specifically because we need intelligence capability that operates without creating a visible footprint. The moment I engaged, I prevented 12 special operations casualties, Olivia said. I understand what it cost the program. I also understand what the alternative cost would have been. She paused. I reported the threat 3 times. The system didn't move fast enough. People were going to die because of a 48-hour review window. I made a decision. You made a decision that was above your authority. I made a decision that was within my judgment as a field officer under imminent threat conditions. If the program's protocols don't account for a scenario in which a classified observer witnesses a mass casualty event that she can prevent, then the protocols need revision. She held Soren's gaze. I would make the same decision again. Soren looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something Olivia hadn't expected. I know you would, she said. That's not what concerns me. Then what does? Soren leaned back. What concerns me, she said, is that Major Farlow's review queue, because his backlog is not 48 hours. His backlog has been running at 60 to 72 hours for the last 4 months. And 3 other reports from 3 other observation assets in adjacent grids were also flagged and held during the same window. Olivia went still. 3 other reports, she said. Different grids, different assets, same classification routing, same secondary verification delay. Soren's voice was precise and controlled. Your engagement today is going to generate a formal review. That review is going to look at the queue, and when it looks at the queue, it is going to find those other reports. The implications arrange themselves very quickly. 1 delayed report. 1 flagged observation that was a process error. That was correctable and manageable, and the kind of thing that got addressed in a memo and a process adjustment. 4 delayed reports from 4 different assets across a 60 to 72-hour period. That was something else. That was a pattern. Has anything happened in those other grids? Olivia asked. Soren looked at her with an expression that answered the question before she spoke. 2 small incidents, limited casualties, both attributed to incomplete intelligence at the planning stage. She paused. No one connected them to the queue backlog until now. Olivia stared at the table. Because no one was looking at the queue, she said. Because no one had a reason to look at the queue, Soren said. Until you gave them one. She found Ethan at 2200 hours, sitting outside the medical bay in the particular way of a commander who is not ready to stop being near his people, yet who needs the proximity even when there's nothing productive to be done with it. He looked up when she approached. Briggs, she asked. Clean. Full recovery expected. He studied her face. How was yours? Informative, she said. She sat down against the wall beside him. Not close the comfortable distance of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to manufacture intimacy to acknowledge it. They flagged my reports because of a review queue backlog, she said. I know. One of the intel people told Marsh. There are 3 other reports from other assets. Same time window, same delay. Ethan was quiet for a moment. And those other grids? 2 incidents, limited casualties. Hai made a sound that was not a word. Just a sound, low and tight, the sound of a person who has been operating in this world long enough to know what limited casualties means when said in a certain tone of voice. So it's bigger than 1 queue, he said. It's bigger than 1 queue. He looked at the ceiling. Farlow, he said. You know him. I know of him. He ran the analysis division that provided the pre-mission intelligence on our engagement today. He paused. The report that said small patrol, limited enemy presence. Olivia turned to look at him. He turned to look at her. The same analyst, she said. The same analyst, he confirmed. The hallway was quiet around them. Somewhere in the medical bay, equipment hummed. That's not a backlog, Olivia said. No, Ethan said. It's not. She felt something settle in her chest. Not the loosening from before, but the opposite. A tightening, the specific feeling of a problem expanding beyond the frame she had been using to contain it, of a situation that had looked like an institutional failure, revealing itself to be something with more deliberate edges. I need to call Soren, she said. It's 2200. I know what time it is. She pulled out her phone. Ethan watched her. Hayes, he said. She looked up. If Farlow is what this is starting to look like, if the backlog is not an accident, then the people with the sealed folders from this afternoon are going to become a very different kind of problem. I know. You'll be the one who surfaced it. I know that too. That's not a comfortable position. She looked at him steadily. Neither is sitting on a ridge watching people walk into a canyon that you know is full of 40 fighters, she said. I've already done the uncomfortable thing once today. This is just paperwork. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She called Soren. The call lasted 11 minutes. Ethan didn't hear the specifics. He was close enough to hear her voice, but not the words, and he didn't try to close the distance. Whatever was being said was between Olivia and her chain of command, and his job right now was not to insert himself, but to be a presence, which was the least complicated thing he'd been asked to do all day. When she hung up, she sat for a moment without speaking. Soren is pulling Farlow's full Q history, she said, going back 6 months. 6 months. That's when the backlog started extending beyond the standard window. She said there were anomalies she'd noticed but hadn't prioritized. She paused. She's prioritizing now. What happens to your program? Suspended pending review. The observation assignment is grounded until they understand the full scope of the intelligence routing compromise. She said it flatly without visible feeling. How do you feel about that? Ethan asked. She was quiet for a moment. I feel like I spent 3 days on a ridge gathering intelligence that nobody read, she said. And I feel like today I found out it wasn't the first time that had happened. So whatever they need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. Suspend the program review, the Q audit 6 months of Farlow's decisions. I'll accept that, because what I can't accept is the alternative. Which is, the alternative is the world where I stay on that ridge and follow my orders, she said. And 12 people don't come home. She said it without drama, without weight, like a mathematical statement. Here is the equation. Here is the solution. Here is what I chose when I solved it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You know what's going to happen, he said. When Soren pulls 6 months of Farlow's history. When the review finds those 3 other reports and the 2 incidents. Someone is going to have to explain why a review queue had a 60 to 72-hour backlog for 4 months, she said. And why the analyst responsible for that queue was also providing pre-mission intelligence to operational planning units, including mine. She paused. And why the pre-mission intelligence he provided consistently underestimated enemy force presence. The word consistently landed in the hallway like a dropped weight. Ethan said nothing. 3 other reports, Olivia said. 2 incidents, 1 engagement today, and a pre-mission assessment that told you to expect a small patrol. She looked at him. You're a commander with you're a commander with extensive operational experience. Does that read like a backlog to you? No, Ethan said. It does not. What does it read like? He was quiet. It reads like someone was making sure that certain intelligence didn't reach the people who needed it, he said. Yes, she said. It does. Another silence. Farlow has access to everything, Ethan said. Every observation report, every asset in the field, every pre-mission assessment going to operational units. If he's been managing the flow of that information, then someone has known exactly what our assets were seeing and exactly what our operators were being told, Olivia finished. For at least 6 months. The scope of it was not something that could be fully absorbed in a hallway at 2200 hours. Ethan had spent his career in an environment that acknowledged the theoretical possibility of intelligence compromise, while treating it as a remote contingency rather than a present reality. The actual weight of it, the specific personal weight of thinking about what a 6-month window of managed intelligence might have cost, was something different. Something that required a different quality of stillness to hold. He thought about the canyon. I thought about the first explosion sealing the exit. He thought about 2 men bleeding. He thought about 40 fighters who had known with remarkable precision when and where to be. Hayes, he said, and his voice was different now, quieter, with an edge she hadn't heard before. The ambush today, the way it was set up, the positioning, the timing, the 2-phase structure. That level of preparation required knowing approximately when and where you'd be operating, she said. Yes, I've been thinking about that since the helicopter. Your 3 reports described everything. The force composition, the 2 phases, the extraction point. Yes. Those reports were in Farlow's queue. Yes. Unverified and held for further analysis. Yes. Ethan looked at the floor. So either the enemy had their own intelligence on our mission timeline, he said, or someone gave it to them. The hallway hummed. Call Soren back, Ethan said. I know. Right now. I know. She was already dialing. At 2300 hours. 3 things happened in rapid succession. First Lieutenant Colonel Soren authorized an emergency security review of the intelligence routing system. Second Major Dennis Farlow was informed that his access credentials had been suspended pending a personnel security investigation. Third, 2 MPs arrived at Farlow's quarters. He wasn't there. His personal effects were there. His uniform. His equipment. Everything that should have suggested a person who planned to return. But Farlow was gone. The word reached Ethan and Olivia through Soren, who called back 12 minutes after the MPs reported the empty room, and who delivered the information in the specific tone of voice of a senior officer who has just watched a manageable institutional problem become something considerably less manageable. He knew we were looking, Olivia said when the call ended. Or he was tipped, Ethan said. Same thing. Someone with access to Soren's office or comms knew the security review was coming. Which means the problem is not Farlow alone. No, Olivia said. It never was. She stood up. Ethan stood up. They looked at each other in the fluorescent quiet of the medical bay corridor. And for a moment, neither of them said anything, because what was there to say that the situation hadn't already said with complete clarity? A 3-day observation. 3 ignored reports. On ambush that killed no one because of decisions made on a ridge with 11 rounds and everything on the line. And now a missing analyst and a security investigation that was going to turn the entire intelligence apparatus upside down and see what fell out. This is bigger than the canyon, Ethan said. Yes, Olivia said. Bigger than the queue. Yes. Bigger than one analyst. She looked at him with the steady, unblinking focus that he had heard in her voice all afternoon that had translated from sound to expression without losing any of its quality. I spent 3 days on a ridge gathering intelligence that someone made sure never reached the right people, she said. And then I spent an hour making sure that the consequences of that decision did as little damage as possible. She paused. I'm not done. What do you mean? I mean that the engagement is over. But what it revealed isn't. She picked up her rifle case. The review is going to need someone who can speak to what the observation assets were actually reporting. What we saw. What the field picture looked like versus what Farlow's assessments said it looked like. You're going to testify. I'm going to do more than testify, she said. I have 72 hours of field notes from this operation. I have 3 reports with timestamps showing exactly when they were submitted and when they were last accessed. And I have 6 months of my own previous submissions that I'm now very interested in comparing to the operational outcomes in those grids. Ethan stared at her. You kept records, he said. I keep records of everything, she said. It's what I do. I observe. I document. I report. She paused. I just usually expect someone to read the reports. There was something almost wry in the last sentence, a ghost of something that wasn't quite humor, but lived in the neighborhood, the particular territory of a person who has been dealing with a situation long enough to develop a working relationship with its absurdity. Webb's account, Ethan said. The one he's writing. Yes. It's going to be a primary source document for this review. Yes. Which means Webb just became very important. Webb was already very important, Olivia said. Today was just the first day anyone who matters got to see it. Ethan looked at her. Something crossed his face, not the almost smile from earlier. Something more serious, more considered. Hayes, he said. When this review opens up, and it's going to open up wide, you understand that. 6 months of compromised intelligence routing means going back through every operation in every affected grid, and asking what the real picture was versus what planning was told. That's months of work. It's going to involve people a lot more senior than Hargrove. I know. It's going to involve people who are going to look at a junior intelligence captain who broke her observation protocol, surfaced a security compromise, and is now the central witness in a program-wide review, and they're going to make a decision about what that means for her career. I know that too. It might not be a favorable decision. Olivia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she chose her words with the same precision she chose everything else. I submitted 3 reports, she said. Someone made sure they didn't reach the people who needed them. 12 people almost died because of that. 2 incidents in adjacent grids produced limited casualties because of that. And a man who had access to every field asset in this region has just disappeared. She paused. If telling the truth about all of that costs me my career, then my career cost exactly what it should have cost. She picked up her rifle case. She looked at him one more time. Get some sleep, Commander, she said. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. She walked down this corridor. Ethan watched her go. He thought about the canyon. I thought about the way her voice had sounded the first time it appeared on the radio, that impossible, the calm of someone who had already run the numbers and accepted the result and was now simply executing. He thought about 3 days on a ridge alone with a rifle and a notebook and intelligence that nobody wanted to read. He thought about the moment she appeared at the helicopter door, running out of terrain that had been concealing her, her eyes forward, already past the decision to reveal herself. And he thought about what she'd just said. If telling the truth cost me my career, then my career cost exactly what it should have. He had been in this world for 17 years. He had worked with a lot of people. He went back inside to sit with Briggs a while longer. At 0200 hours, Webb finished his account. He had been writing for 4 hours. The notebook was 43 pages. His handwriting was precise and uniform throughout. Not the handwriting of someone taking notes, but the handwriting of someone composing a document, making intentional choices about language and sequence, and the exact words that would be most useful to the people who would read this later. He read it through once. Then he made 2 copies using the base's secure duplication system because Webb had been doing this for 17 years, and he understood that documents of consequence lived longer when they existed in more than one place. He sent 1 copy to Soren. He sent 1 copy to Ethan, and he kept the original. He went to sleep at 0230. At 0400. Soren's office received a formal request from the Inspector General's division initiating a theater-wide review of intelligence routing procedures and personnel security protocols over the previous 6 months. At 04195. A separate request arrived from a 2-star general whose name Olivia would not learn until the following morning, asking specifically for the personnel record of Captain Olivia Hayes, including all intelligence submissions and field observation logs from the current deployment. At 0430, a 3rd request arrived not from a military office, from a civilian oversight committee with a very long name and a very specific mandate. Someone somewhere had decided that the canyon engagement was not a story about one woman on a ridge. It was a story about 6 months of wrong information, and they wanted to know everything. The review had begun, and the people who had built their positions on the assumption that field intelligence could be managed, delayed, and quietly buried were about to discover that the one thing they had failed to account for was a captain with a rifle, a notebook, and 72 hours of records that she had never stopped keeping. Because that was what Olivia Hayes did. She observed, she documented, she reported. And this time, someone was finally going to read the reports. The 2-star general's name was Wallace Drummond. He arrived at the forward operating base at 0900 hours the following morning, without announcement, without the usual apparatus of rank. No advance team, no ceremonial formality, none of the institutional choreography that typically preceded a 2-star's presence anywhere. He walked off the helicopter with 2 aides and a civilian Olivia didn't recognize, and the first thing he did was ask to see the medical bay. He stood at Briggs's bedside for 4 minutes. I didn't say much. He asked Briggs his name, which unit, how long he'd been in. Briggs answered in the careful, measured way of someone who is managing significant pain and is determined not to let it show to a general officer. Drummond listened. He nodded. He put his hand briefly on Briggs's forearm, not a gesture of sympathy exactly, but of acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of a man who has sent people into situations and understands at a bone-deep level what it means when they come back like this. Then he left the medical bay and asked to see Olivia. She was in Soren's office working through her field notes with 2 analysts from the review team when the aide knocked. Soren looked at the aide, looked at Olivia, and said nothing. She didn't need to. The expression was sufficient. Olivia closed her notebook and followed the aide. Drummond was in the base commander's conference room, which had been cleared of everyone except his 2 aides and the civilian who was sitting at the far end of the table with a laptop and the specific focused stillness of someone whose job is to listen to everything and react to nothing. "Captain Hayes," Drummond said. "Sit down." She sat. He looked at her for a moment, with the evaluating quality of a man who has spent a career reading people quickly and accurately, who has learned that the first 30 seconds of looking at someone tells you more than the next 30 minutes of formal conversation. "Tell me about the reports," he said. "Not the review team version, yours. What you saw when you reported it, what happened." She told him. She gave him the same precision she had given Soren, but stripped of institutional language, direct, sequential, factual. 3 days, 40 fighters, 3 reports, the 2-phase plan, the extraction point, the 48-hour review window that had been running at 60 to 72 hours for 4 months. Farlow's Q, the pre-mission assessment that had sent Ethan's team in expecting a small patrol. She told him about the engagement without dramatizing it. He listened without interrupting, which in Olivia's experience was unusual for officers of his rank and not unusual for officers of his caliber. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The field notes," he said. "You have them here?" "Yes, sir." "All 72 hours?" "All 72 hours, plus my previous 6 months of submissions from this deployment." Drummond looked at the civilian at the end of the table. The civilian looked up from the laptop. "Everything," Drummond said to the civilian. The civilian nodded and went back to the laptop. "Captain," Drummond said, turning back to Olivia, "I want to be direct with you about something." "Please," she said. "What you've surfaced, what the initial review is already finding in Farlow's Q, is not a 48-hour administrative backlog. It is a systematic, deliberate suppression of field intelligence over a minimum 6-month period, affecting at minimum 4 observation assets across 3 operational grids." He paused. 2 of those grids had operational incidents during the suppression window. "Limited casualties," Olivia said. "That's what the report said. The review is already finding that limited may have been an optimistic characterization." He let that land. "We are also finding that the pre-mission assessments provided by Farlow's section to operational planning units during this period show a consistent pattern of underestimating enemy force presence and capability." Olivia felt the thing in her chest tighten further. "How consistent?" she said. "Every assessment, for 6 months, every single one showed enemy presence at 30 to 50% of what the observation assets were actually reporting." He held her gaze. "Someone made sure that the people planning operations never saw the full picture." The room was very quiet. "Farlow didn't build this alone," Olivia said. "No," Drummond said. "He did not." "How many people?" "That's what we're working to establish. What I can tell you is that his access level gave him the ability to manage intelligence routing across this entire theater. But the decisions about what to route where and what to hold required a level of operational knowledge about mission planning timelines that goes beyond what Farlow could have obtained independently." "Someone inside mission planning," Olivia said. "Someone who knew which missions were launching when and where, who knew what the observation assets were seeing versus what they were being told." He paused. "Who would benefit from ensuring that our operational units went into certain environments underinformed?" The word benefit was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and Olivia knew exactly what it was doing. "The canyon yesterday," she said. "The ambush, the positioning, the timing." "We are looking at it," Drummond said. "Very carefully. They knew Ethan's team was coming." "We are looking at it," he said again, And the repetition was not evasion. It was the measured language of a man who has conclusions forming that he is not ready to speak aloud until he has the evidence to anchor them. But his eyes said enough. Olivia sat with it for a moment. 12 men in a canyon. 40 fighters who knew exactly when and where they'd arrive. On ambush that had been built over 3 days, prepared with a precision that suggested advanced knowledge of the mission timeline. 3 intelligence reports that described the trap in detail, sitting in a queue managed by a man who had just disappeared. "Sir," she said, "the Civilian Oversight Committee. The request that came in at 0430. You heard about that?" "Soren told me." Drummond looked at her steadily. "The committee has been tracking anomalies in this theater's operational outcomes for 8 months, he said. Win-loss ratios, casualty patterns, mission compromise rates. The numbers were pointing at something they couldn't explain through normal operational variance. He paused. "Your engagement yesterday was the first time the mechanism became visible." "Because I survived it," she said. "Because you documented it," he said. "And because 12 people who were supposed to be in that canyon at the end of this story are instead sitting in a team room right now." She understood what he was saying. She understood it completely. If the ambush had gone the way it was designed to go, if 40 fighters had overrun 12 SEALs in a canyon with no exits, no air support, and no unknown sniper on a ridge, the report would have read mission compromise. Enemy contact casualties sustained. It would have been investigated. It would have been called tragic. It would have been attributed to incomplete intelligence in an uncertain environment. And Farlow's queue would have continued. And the pre-mission assessments would have continued. And the people planning operations in this theater would have continued going in underinformed into environments that someone had made sure they didn't fully understand. "The people who built this," Olivia said. "How far up does it go?" Drummond looked at her for a long time before answering. "Far enough," he said, "that I came here personally." Ethan heard about Drummond's visit from Webb, who heard about it from Marsh, who had an uncanny ability to know things that happened inside buildings he was not currently in. This was one of Marsh's most valued operational characteristics, and also at times one of his most unsettling. "2-star," Webb said. "Arrived at door 900, went straight to medical, then to Hayes." Ethan was quiet. "He brought a civilian," Webb said. "Nobody in this building knows who the civilian is." "Oversight Committee," Ethan said. Webb looked at him. "Soren mentioned a request at 0430, Ethan said. "Civilian Committee. They'd been tracking outcome anomalies for 8 months." Webb absorbed this. 8 months, he said. 8 months. Webb looked at his boots. "The canyon yesterday," he said slowly. "The way it was set up. I've been in ambushes before. I've been in badly planned ones and well-planned ones and ones that were brilliant and ones that were lucky. What happened yesterday?" "Was specific," Ethan said. "Specific," Webb confirmed. "The timing, the positioning, the 2 phases, the extraction point coverage. That's not general area ambush planning. That's mission-specific preparation." "I know." "Which means they knew the mission. I know Marcus." Webb looked up. Ethan almost never used his first name. "Someone gave them our timeline," Ethan said. "Someone who had access to mission planning. Someone who knew that 12 men were going into that canyon on that day at that time, and what the extraction protocol would be. And Farlow was making sure the observation intelligence that would have warned us never reached planning." "Yes." "So we walked in blind," Webb said, "because someone made us blind." "Yes." Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled in the way of someone who is containing something large. "Briggs is in the medical bay," he said. "Yes." "His shoulder." "Yes." "Because we walked in blind." "Yes," Ethan said. "Because we walked in blind." Webb stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a while, looking at nothing. Doing the specific work of a man who is taking something very personal and deciding how to hold it in a way that remains professional and functional and does not become something else. Ethan let him do it. After a while, Webb said, "What do you need from me?" "The account you wrote," Ethan said. How detailed is the timeline section? Exact timestamps. Radio calls, shots fired, position changes, enemy response patterns. Everything with times. Because if someone gave the enemy our mission timeline, that timeline matches exactly to the preparation visible in the ambush. The positioning, the phase structure, the extraction coverage. All of it was built around a specific window. And my account documents what that window looked like from inside it, Webb said. Yes. Which is evidence. Yes. Webb turned from the window. I need to add something to the account, he said. What? The pre-mission briefing. The assessment that said small patrol, limited enemy presence. I was in that briefing. I remember it exactly. I remember thinking the numbers felt light, but not having a specific reason to push back on them because they came from analysis. He paused. I have a specific reason now. Write it, Ethan said. Webb sat back down and opened his notebook. Rodriguez found Olivia 2 hours after her meeting with Drummond in the same corridor outside the medical bay where they'd talked the night before. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her notebook open across her knees, writing in the small, precise handwriting of someone who has been taking field notes for years and has developed an economy of movement that produces dense, information-rich text in very little space. He sat down beside her without asking. She didn't look up. 2-star, he said. Yes. That's a significant level of attention for a forward operating base. Yes. Good significant or bad significant? She looked up at that. He came here personally, she said. That's either very good or very bad, depending on what the review finds. What's it going to find? She told him. Not everything. Some of what Drummond had said was operational and classified, and would remain that way until the review formally established its findings. But enough. The 6-month pattern. The consistent underestimation. The outcome anomalies the Oversight Committee had been tracking. The specific precision of the canyon ambush. Rodriguez listened. His expression changed as she talked. Not dramatically, not with the performance of reaction, but in the specific way of a man who is receiving information that is rearranging the framework he has been using to understand recent events. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The ambush knew we were coming, he said. The evidence points that way. Which means someone told them. Yes. Someone who had access to our mission timeline. Yes. He was quiet. I've been doing this for 9 years, he said. 9 years. I have never not once had a reason to think that the bad information we were working with was anything other than the fog of war. Intelligence is imperfect. Environments are uncertain. You plan for the information you have, and you adapt when the information is wrong. He paused. The idea that the information was wrong because someone made it wrong is harder to accept than the fog of war, she said. Yes, but it's what the evidence is showing. He looked at her. How are you this calm? He said. It was a genuine question asked with genuine curiosity rather than accusation. She thought about it before answering. I'm not calm, she said. I'm focused. They're not the same thing. What's the difference? Calm is the absence of feeling, she said. Focused is feeling it and not letting it run the analysis. She looked at her notebook. I'm angry. I have been angry since I submitted my second report and watched it disappear into a queue. I'm angrier now that I understand why. But anger doesn't help me organize 6 months of field notes into a coherent evidentiary record. So I'm focused. Rodriguez looked at her notebook. Is that what you're doing, the evidentiary record? The review team is going to need a structured comparison between what the observation assets reported and what Farlow's assessment said. I have my own submissions for the last 6 months. If I organize them against the operational outcomes in each grid, it creates a documented picture of the discrepancy. She paused. I'm the only person who has both the field perspective and the submissions history. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done as well. So you're building the case, he said. I'm organizing the evidence, she said. The case builds itself. Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Can I help? She looked up. I can get you the operational logs from our end, he said. Mission timelines, pre-mission briefing records, the assessment documents we were given. I was in the briefings. I remember them. If you're cross-referencing field observation against what planning was told, you need the planning side of it. She studied him. That's a significant amount of information to hand over to a review you're not formally part of. I'm formally part of the team that walked into that canyon, he said. Briggs is formally part of the team that walked into that canyon. That seems like sufficient reason to be formally part of making sure it's understood why we walked in the way we did. She held his gaze. Then she turned to a fresh page in her notebook. Start with the pre-mission briefing from yesterday, she said. Everything Farlow's section told your planning unit about the expected environment. Every number. Rodriguez pulled out his own notebook. They worked for 3 hours. At 400 hours. Drummond convened a meeting that included Soren Ethan, the base commander, 2 members of the review team, and the civilian from the oversight committee, whose name turned out to be Richard Kessler, and who had been working intelligence oversight for 22 years, and who said almost nothing during the first 40 minutes of the meeting, and then when he spoke, said the thing that changed the entire room's understanding of what they were dealing with. Farlow's Q, Kessler said. We've been treating it as the primary mechanism, the place where intelligence was being held. He paused. It's not the primary mechanism, it's the second mechanism. Drummond looked at him. The primary mechanism, Kessler said, is the source validation protocol, the process by which observation reports are assigned a reliability rating before they enter the routing system. Farlow controlled the queue, but someone else controlled the protocol. Silence. Who manages source validation? Soren asked. Formally, it's a committee function, Kessler said. 3 analysts rotating quarterly, but the committee chair has override authority on reliability ratings. A committee chair who consistently applies the lowest reliability rating to reports from specific assets. Creates a category of intelligence that automatically routes to extended review, Ethan said, and never reaches operational planning within a usable window, Kessler confirmed. Because the routing system treats low reliability reports as lower priority. They go into Farlow's queue, where they stay until someone processes them. He paused. The committee chair for the last 6 months was a major named Sandra Voss. Where is Voss? Drummond asked. Kessler looked at him. She submitted emergency leave paperwork at 0630 this morning, he said. Family medical emergency. She is currently, as of an hour ago, not on base. The silence was absolute. Same window as Farlow, Ethan said. Approximately, Kessler said. They moved together, Soren said. Which means they communicated, Drummond said. After the security review was initiated last night, someone told them both that the review was coming. Every person in the room reached the same conclusion at the same moment. The security review itself had been compromised before it began. Someone in Soren's office, or in Drummond's communication chain, or in the network between them, had reached Farlow and Voss within hours of the review being authorized and given them enough warning to disappear. The compromise is active, Kessler said. It is not historical. It is operating right now. Drummond looked at Soren. Soren looked at Ethan. Ethan thought about Olivia in the corridor outside the medical bay, organizing 6 months of field notes into an evidentiary record. Captain Hayes's field notes, Ethan said. Her submission history. Is that data secure? Kessler looked at him sharply. She has physical copies, Ethan said. Her notebooks. She's been working from them for the last 2 hours in a corridor with Rodriguez. Physical copies are safe, Kessler said. The digital submissions in the routing system are potentially accessible to whoever is still inside the system, Soren finished. Yes, Kessler said. Drummond made a decision in approximately 2 seconds. Lock the routing system, he said. Full access suspension. No one in node changes out until the review team has a complete forensic copy. He looked at Soren. Where is Hayes? Medical bay corridor as of 90 minutes ago. Get her in here. Olivia arrived 4 minutes later with her notebooks under her arm and Rodriguez behind her, because Rodriguez had been with her, and nobody had told him not to come, and he had the particular quality of presence that makes people not think to exclude him from things. She read the room in about 3 seconds. They moved together, she said. Farlow and whoever controls source validation. Kessler looked at her with an expression that was both startled and approving. How did you? Because Farlow alone couldn't explain the consistency, she said. The queue is the second filter. If reports were being systematically downgraded before they entered the queue, that's what produced the pattern. The queue just made the delay look procedural. She set her notebooks on the table. Major Sandra Voss, Committee Chair Source Validation, 6-month tenure. Kessler stared at her. She's in the field notes, Olivia said. 3 of my submissions were downgraded to Category 3 reliability within hours of submission. The same work, the same sourcing, the same methodology that had been producing Category 1 ratings for 18 months suddenly started producing Category 3. The first downgrade happened 9 days after Voss took the committee chair. She opened her notebook to a marked page. I noticed it at the time. I flagged it to Soren as a potential methodology question. I didn't understand what it meant. Soren looked like someone had hit her. You flagged it, she said. 4 months ago. You told me to submit a clarifying addendum to my next report explaining my sourcing methodology. I did. The next report was also downgraded. Soren was very still. I didn't connect it, she said quietly. I told you to clarify your methodology, and I didn't connect the downgrade pattern to Voss's chair appointment. You didn't have reason to, Olivia said. There were 100 possible explanations for a methodology question. The obvious one is that the methodology needed clarification. But you noticed, Soren said. I always notice, Olivia said. I document everything. I just didn't have the full picture. She put her notebook on the table in front of Kessler. Pages 41 through 63, she said. Chronological record of all submissions from month 3 of the current deployment onward with reliability ratings and the delta between my historical ratings and the post-Voss ratings. Cross-referenced with grid outcomes. She paused. The pattern is not subtle. Kessler opened the notebook. He looked at it. He turned 3 pages. Then he looked up at Drummond and said in the quiet voice of a man who has been doing oversight work for 22 years and does not use strong language carelessly. This is everything we needed and could not find. Drummond looked at Olivia. Captain, he said, how long have you been keeping records like this? My entire career, she said. It's habit. Field observers are only as useful as their documentation. And you have 6 months of this. I have 4 years of it, she said. But the last 6 months are the relevant window. Something crossed Drummond's face. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to the expression of a man who has been trying to understand how one person operating alone on a ridge had managed to both prevent a mass casualty event and produce the evidentiary foundation for a theater-wide intelligence investigation within a 24-hour period. He was starting to understand. Rodriguez, Ethan said quietly from his position near the door. Rodriguez looked at him. You want to tell them what you just spent 3 hours building? Rodriguez looked at Kessler. Mission logs, Rodriguez said. Pre-mission assessments, briefing records, timeline documents. Cross-referenced with Captain Hayes' submission records. If you want the full picture of what planning was told versus what the field was seeing, I can walk you through it. Kessler looked at Rodriguez, then back at Olivia. You organized this together, he said. In the last 3 hours. It needed to be done, Olivia said. It would have taken my team a week, Kessler said. Your team didn't have the field notes, she said. At 17:30 hours, the base went to restricted communications. Every outgoing transmission was logged and screened. Every access request to the intelligence routing system was flagged. The base commander was informed that the restriction was temporary and necessary, and that it came with Drummond's personal authorization, which ended the conversation before it started. At 1800, 2 developments arrived in rapid succession. First, a security alert from a base 40 kilometers east. A vehicle matching the description of one assigned to Farlow's unit had been logged at a checkpoint 6 hours earlier, heading in the direction of a civilian transit hub. Second, A communication intercept, flagged automatically by the base's signals intelligence system, showing an encrypted message sent from inside the base's network at 0545 that morning. 45 minutes before the security review was formally authorized, before anyone should have known it was coming. The message had been sent from a terminal in the intelligence analysis section, Voss's section. But the access credentials used to send it did not belong to Voss. They belonged to a captain first class named Alan Mercer, who was currently on duty, who had been on base the entire time, and who was at this exact moment sitting at his desk in the analysis section as though nothing unusual had happened. Kessler looked at the intercept. He looked at Drummond. He said, "He didn't run." Drummond was already moving. "Because he didn't think we'd find it," Ethan said from behind them both. Everyone turned. Ethan was standing in the doorway, with the specific expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a calculation. Farlow ran because he knew the queue would be found. Voss ran because she knew the rating records would be found. They knew what they left behind. He paused. But whoever sent that message at 0545 thought the encryption would hold, thought the credentials would create enough distance, thought running would look more suspicious than staying. He warned them, Olivia said. He sent the alert that told Farlow and Voss to move, and then he sat down at his desk and decided that the safest place to be was in plain sight. "He's been sitting there all day," Rodriguez said. "While we've been building the case," Olivia said. She looked at Drummond. Drummond looked at the intercept. He made another 2-second decision. "Kessler," he said. "You and me. Now." He walked out. Kessler followed. The door closed. In the room, Ethan and Olivia and Rodriguez stood with the remaining review team members in the particular silence of people who are waiting for the next movement in a sequence that has accelerated beyond the pace at which they can meaningfully direct it. "Mercer," Rodriguez said. "How long has he been in the section?" 8 months, Soren said from the corner where she'd been standing silently for the last 20 minutes. Her voice was very controlled. "He arrived approximately 2 months before the outcome. Anomalies started appearing in the committee data." "Which means he was in place before Voss took the chair," Ethan said. "Yes." "He was there first," Olivia said. Everyone looked at her. "The structure runs Mercer to Voss to Farlow," she said. "Mercer establishes himself in the section. Voss takes the committee chair possibly at his recommendation, possibly through the same network that placed him. Farlow manages the queue. 3 people. 3 different choke points in the intelligence pipeline. Every report that threatens operational security for someone goes through 3 separate hands before it can reach anyone who would act on it. And each of them is defensible in isolation," Soren said. She sounded like someone taking inventory of a disaster. "A queue backlog, a methodology question, a source reliability rating, each one explainable. Together. A system," Olivia said. "A system." Soren confirmed. Webb, who had been standing in the corner so quietly that several people in the room had apparently forgotten he was present, said, "The canyon, yesterday." Everyone looked at him. Someone in that structure had access to our mission timeline. Mercer's section processes pre-mission assessments. Voss's committee reviewed the observation reports that described the enemy position. Farlow held those reports in the queue. He paused. One person with access to all 3 points had a complete picture, our timeline, their preparation, our intelligence gap. The room was very quiet. "All 3 points converge in Mercer's section," Ethan said. "Yes," Webb said. Olivia was looking at the closed door. "They're going to need the notebooks," she said. "Kessler already has them," Rodriguez said. "Not those notebooks," she said. "My field notebooks from the previous 6 months, the complete set. I have them in my quarters." If Mercer was coordinating across all 3 points, the timing of my reliability downgrades. She stopped, looked at Soren. "The first downgrade happened 9 days after Voss took the chair," she said, "which is 2 months and 9 days after Mercer arrived in the section." She was doing math. They could see her doing it. "The first operation that showed anomalies in the committee's data," she said. "When was it?" Soren pulled up her tablet. She found the date. She said it. Olivia's eyes went very still. "That's 11 days after my first downgraded report," she said. "The operation used intelligence that included reports from my grid. With the downgrade, my report would have been in Farlow's queue. The planning unit would not have seen it." "What was in the report?" Soren asked. "Enemy force repositioning. A change in patrol pattern that suggested advanced knowledge of our operational schedule in that grid." She paused. "The operation went in on the old schedule and encountered prepared resistance at a position that should have been clear." She looked at Soren. "Limited casualties. That's what the report said afterward. 2 people. That was what limited casualties meant in the specific accounting of that grid in the report that had been written after the operation. 2 people. Injuries, not fatalities. Categorized as operational risk attributed to environmental uncertainty. Because the intelligence that would have changed, the planning was sitting in a queue. Because Olivia's report had been downgraded 9 days after Mercer arrived, and Voss was positioned and the system was ready to run. Because 2 months and 9 days of preparation had produced a machine that turned accurate field intelligence into administrative delay. Olivia closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Then she opened them and picked up her pen. "I need to go back through the 6 months," she said. "Every downgraded report, every outcome. I need the full timeline built before Kessler comes back." "That's going to take hours," Rodriguez said. "Then I'd better start now," she said. She opened her notebook to a fresh page, and in the quiet of the conference room, with the base locked down around her and a 2-star general in the next room, and a man who had spent 8 months dismantling her work, sitting 40 meters away at a desk, he thought was still safe. Captain Olivia Hayes began methodically and without pause to document the full weight of what had been done. Not for herself. For the 2 people in the first operation. For Briggs. For the 12 men in the canyon. For every operation in every grid across 6 months of manufactured blindness. She was a field observer. She observed. She documented. She reported. And this time the reports were going to be read by everyone. Mercer didn't run. That was the thing that stayed with Ethan long after everything else had resolved itself. Not the arrest. Not the investigation. Not the weeks of depositions and classified hearings and institutional restructuring that followed. What stayed with him was the image of Alan Mercer sitting at his desk in the analysis section at 1800 hours on the day. The entire operation collapsed around him, with his uniform exactly correct and his workstation active, and a cup of coffee going cold at his right elbow, looking for all the world like a man who had nothing to hide. Drummond walked in with 2 military police officers and Kessler and said Mercer's name. Mercer looked up, and in the 2 seconds before his expression changed, Ethan standing in the doorway, because Drummond had not specifically told him not to be there, saw something that he would spend a long time trying to name accurately. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something colder and more calculated, the expression of a man running a final probability assessment, arriving at a number he didn't like and accepting the result. "Major Drummond," Mercer said. His voice was completely steady. "Captain Mercer," Drummond said. "Come with me." No accusation, no drama, no performance. Just those 4 words delivered in the flat, complete authority of a 2-star general who has made a decision and is simply executing it. Mercer stood up. He straightened his uniform jacket. He picked up nothing from his desk. He walked out between the 2 MPs without being asked to, without being touched, with the specific controlled composure of a man who has decided that his best remaining option is to perform dignity until something else becomes available. He looked at Ethan as he passed through the doorway. Ethan looked back. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said completely. Olivia didn't witness the arrest. She was still in the conference room with her notebooks when Rodriguez came in and told her it was done, sitting across from the 2 review team analysts who had been working through her 6-month submission history with the focused intensity of people who had found what they were looking for and were now building the architecture around it. She looked up when Rodriguez spoke. "Clean?" she asked. "Clean," he said. "He's in custody. Kessler has the terminal logs. The encrypted message traces directly to his credentials, and his physical access card was scanned at that terminal at 0543. 2 minutes before transmission, she said. Yes. She looked back at her notebook. What happens now? Rodriguez asked. Now the review team has everything it needs to reconstruct the full 6 months, she said. Mercer in custody, Farlow and Voss flagged and being tracked, Kessler's forensic copy of the routing system. She turned a page. They'll find the network eventually, who Mercer was reporting to, where the information about our mission timelines was going, and who benefited from it. That could take months, Rodriguez said. Yes, she said. It will take months, and you'll have to testify through all of it. Yes. He sat down across from her. How are you holding up? He asked. It was the same genuine quality his questions always had, direct without performance, actually asking. She considered the question honestly. I'm tired, she said. I have been on a ridge, or in a debrief, or building a timeline for approximately 96 hours. I'm tired in a way that I don't think a full night of sleep is going to completely address. She paused. But I'm all right. That's not the same as fine. No, she agreed. It's not the same as fine. He was quiet for a moment. The 2 people from the first operation, he said. The limited casualties. You've been thinking about them. She had told him about them 3 hours ago in the middle of building the timeline. She hadn't made anything of it, just stated the fact, included it in the sequence, moved on. But he had heard it and held it. Yes, she said. Their injuries. I don't know the specifics. The report said limited. I don't know their names. I don't know what limited meant for them specifically. She closed her notebook for the first time in hours. I know that my report was in Farlow's queue when their operation launched. I know that if the reliability rating on my report hadn't been changed 9 days earlier, it would have been in front of their planning team. She looked at her hands. I've been carrying that for the last 3 hours. It's not yours to carry, Rodriguez said. I know that. You reported it 3 times. You reported everything you saw. I know that too. Then, knowing something and feeling it are different things, she said. I know it's not my fault. I know I did everything I was supposed to do. I know the failure was in the system, not in my work. She looked at him. And I also know that the system has names: Mercer, Voss, Farlow, and whoever Mercer was reporting to. Real people made deliberate choices that produced specific outcomes. Knowing that it wasn't my fault doesn't stop me from wishing I had pushed harder. Called Soren directly. Found a way around the queue. She paused. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes. After every operation that goes wrong, and I've had some go badly wrong, every person I know does exactly what you're doing right now. Runs the tape backward. Looks for the moment where a different choice changes the outcome. He leaned forward slightly. The people who do that are not the people who caused the problem. The people who caused the problem don't run the tape backward. They just move to the next operation. She held his gaze. Mercer didn't run the tape backward, he said. He sat at his desk and drank his coffee and waited to see if he'd gotten away with it. A long silence. Thank you, she said. It's the truth. I know, she said. That's why it helps. Briggs was moved to a more comfortable room at 1900 hours, upgraded from the immediate post-surgical bay to a standard recovery room, which in the specific geography of military medical facilities meant the difference between a space that was purely functional and a space that was functional with an additional 18 inches of floor room and a window. Ethan visited at 2000. Briggs was awake, propped up, looking considerably better than he had any right to after a shoulder surgery and the previous 48 hours of his life. Commander, he said, how's the shoulder? The surgeon says full recovery, 8 weeks. Good. I told her 6. What did she say? She said 8. Ethan sat down. Mercer, Briggs said. In custody. Good. A pause. Farlow. Being tracked. The vehicle was logged at a checkpoint 6 hours before we found the trail. Kessler has people on it. Voss? Same. They moved together, which means they had a pre-arranged protocol for this scenario, which means they expected that this scenario was possible. Ethan looked at his hands, which means they've been preparing to run for a while. Briggs was quiet for a moment. The ambush, he said. They knew we were coming. Yes. Someone told them our timeline. Yes. Briggs looked at the ceiling. My shoulder, he said, is because someone told 40 fighters that we were going to be in that canyon. Yes. Another silence. Hayes stopped it from being worse, Briggs said. Yes. She was there the whole time, and we didn't know. 3 days, Ethan said. She was on that ridge for 3 days. Alone. Alone. Briggs turned his head to look at Ethan. She saved my life, he said. It was stated the way Briggs stated most things, directly, without decoration, giving the fact exactly the weight it deserved, and no more. She saved all of us, Ethan said. I know, but specifically mine, because I was the one who couldn't move fast enough at the end, and she was the one who cleared the path. He paused. I'd like to thank her. I'll tell her. In person, Briggs said. When I'm mobile. 8 weeks, Ethan said. 6, Briggs said. Jamag. The full picture began emerging over the following 72 hours. Kessler's team worked through the routing system forensics with the methodical speed of people who had the evidence and were now building the architecture of understanding around it. What they found was more extensive than anyone except possibly Kessler had expected, and Kessler's expression when he presented the preliminary findings to Drummond suggested that even he had been surprised. Mercer had been operating for 14 months, not 8. His first 6 months had been preparation, establishing trust, building relationships, learning the information flows of the section before beginning to manipulate them. The reliability downgrade mechanism hadn't been invented by Voss. It had been a system that already existed and had already been quietly tested on 2 observation assets before Olivia's reports began receiving it, both of which had been reassigned before anyone noticed the pattern. Olivia had not been the first target. She had been the first one who noticed, and even she had not understood what she was seeing until the canyon changed everything. The network Mercer reported to was larger than the theater. Kessler identified communication threads running through 4 different channels to a financial structure that had been operating in parallel to the intelligence compromise, a structure designed to monetize the intelligence gap to profit from the specific situations created by sending operational units in with false pictures of the environment. Not every operation, not carelessly. Selectively, specifically in grids, where the outcomes could be shaped without generating enough individual anomalies to trigger a systemic review. The Oversight Committee had detected the anomalies 8 months in. It had taken them 8 more months to find the mechanism. Olivia had handed them the mechanism in 72 hours of field notes and 1 night of organized documentation. When Kessler told her this in the conference room on the 3rd day after the canyon, she was quiet for a long time. 14 months, she said. Yes. And I noticed something was wrong 4 months ago. Yes. And flagged it to Soren as a methodology question. Yes. She looked at the table. If I had pushed harder, she said. If I had escalated instead of accepting the clarifying addendum, you would have been reporting a hunch about a source reliability rating to a chain of command that had no framework to recognize what you were describing, Kessler said. The mechanism was invisible precisely because each component was individually defensible. You couldn't have explained what you were seeing, because the full picture required data from multiple assets and multiple grids that you didn't have access to. He paused. What you did have access to was the field, and you documented the field completely and accurately for 4 years. That documentation is what made it possible to build the case in 72 hours instead of 7 months. She absorbed this. The other assets, she said. The 2 who were reassigned before I noticed. We're locating them. Their submission records are part of the forensic review. Were they reassigned for cause? Kessler looked at her steadily. Manufactured cause, he said. Methodology concerns. Reliability questions. He paused. The same playbook. She stared at him. They were removed from the field because they were too accurate, she said. They were removed from the field because their reports were inconvenient, he said. You survived because your reliability rating was downgraded rather than eliminated. Possibly because your track record was too long and too strong to make reassignment plausible. Possibly because Mercer calculated that a downgraded rating was less likely to trigger review than a reassignment. He paused. He miscalculated. She thought about two observation assets who had been doing their jobs accurately and had been quietly moved out of the field for it. She thought about what she would have lost if she had been reassigned 6 months ago. The 3 days on the ridge, the 40 fighters, the canyon, 12 people. She thought about how close all of it had come to never happening the way it happened. I want their names, she said. The two reassigned assets. I want to know who they are. I know it's outside my current access level, she said. I'm asking you directly, when this review is complete and the classification restrictions are reassessed. I want to know who they are, so I can make sure their submissions are re-examined in context and their records are corrected. She looked at Kessler. They did their jobs. Their records should reflect that. Kessler looked at her for a moment. I'll personally ensure it, he said. On the 4th day, Drummond called a meeting that included everyone who had been present for the pieces of this story and was now present for its gathering. Ethan, Webb, Rodriguez, Soren, Kessler, the base commander, 2 members of the oversight committee, and Olivia. She sat at the middle of the table this time, not the end, not the corner. Nobody had directed her to that seat. She had simply sat down, and nobody had suggested she move. Drummond stood. The preliminary findings, he said, establish a coordinated intelligence suppression operation spanning 14 months, involving at minimum 5 confirmed individuals in this theater, and an external financial network that is currently the subject of a parallel investigation by civilian law enforcement and counterintelligence. He paused. Farlow was apprehended this morning at a civilian transit hub. Voss is in custody as of 2 hours ago. Mercer is cooperating with investigators. A murmur moved around the table. The cooperation, Rodriguez said. He's negotiating, Drummond said, which means he has information about the external network that he believes is worth something. Kessler's team is evaluating the terms. What he knows goes above the theater, Ethan said. Yes, Drummond said. Significantly above. The room was quiet. The intelligence routing system, Soren said. Remediation. Complete structural review, Drummond said. The source validation committee function will be redesigned with distributed authority, no single chair with override capability. The secondary review queue will have mandatory escalation triggers that cannot be manually suppressed. Every field asset submission history from the last 14 months will be re-examined against operational outcomes. He paused. And the pre-mission assessment process will be separated from the observation intelligence routing function entirely. No single person or section will have visibility into both sides of that picture again. He looked around the table. These changes are being recommended as theater-wide protocol revisions. They will be reviewed by the Oversight Committee, and if adopted, implemented across all theaters. He paused. The foundation for those recommendations is the documentation produced over the last 72 hours. He looked at Olivia. Captain Hayes, he said, your field notes, your submission history, the timeline you and Rodriguez built the night of the engagement. Kessler has told me that without that documentation, the forensic reconstruction of the mechanism would have taken months, and the structural recommendations would have lacked the specific evidentiary grounding needed to drive theater-wide policy revision. Olivia said nothing. She was waiting for the rest of it. She knew there was a rest. Your observation assignment, Drummond said. The decision you made in the canyon, the protocol breach. He held her gaze. The formal review has examined the engagement record Webb's account and the circumstances of the intelligence failure that created the situation. The review board's finding is that a field officer with your experience and access to the full tactical picture acted within the scope of judgment available to a classified asset under imminent threat conditions, and that the decision to engage was not a breach of protocol as written, but a correct application of the exception provisions under field exigency that are part of your operational mandate. He paused. In plain language, you made the right call. The review confirms it. Around the table, people breathed. Soren closed her eyes briefly. Rodriguez's hand resting on the table relaxed slightly. Webb said nothing, but the set of his shoulders changed in a way that everyone who knew him recognized as the closest thing Marcus Webb had to visible relief. Olivia sat completely still. Your program, Drummond continued, will remain suspended pending the completion of the routing system redesign. Estimated timeline is 60 days. At that point, you will be offered reinstatement to field observation with, and this is the Oversight Committee's recommendation. Not mine, though. I concur completely, a direct reporting channel that bypasses the secondary validation queue entirely and routes to a senior review officer with a 6-hour mandatory response window. A direct channel, Olivia said. Your reports will never sit in a queue again, Drummond said. That is a structural guarantee, not a policy preference. She absorbed this. And the field assets who were reassigned, she said. Their records are being corrected as of this morning. Both have been contacted and offered reinstatement. One has accepted, the other is considering. He paused. Their reassignment documentation is being expunged and replaced with the correct characterization of their service. Olivia thought about 2 people she didn't know sitting somewhere with reassignment paperwork in their files that said their work wasn't good enough. She thought about what it would feel like to have that corrected. She felt something close to what she'd felt at the helicopter door. Not relief, exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of the pressure releasing. The start of a breath that had been waiting to be taken. Thank you, she said. Not performance, not courtesy. Just the 2 words, direct and complete. Drummond nodded. Webb found her afterward in the corridor that had become over the last 4 days, something like her default location, the corridor outside the medical bay, where she could think and write and be near the people she had spent 3 days on a ridge keeping alive. Account's been submitted, he said, formally, to the review board and Kessler and the Oversight Committee. I know, she said. Drummond mentioned it. 43 pages, he said. Every shot, every call. I know. I had to add 12 pages after the debrief. The pre-mission briefing, the assessment documents, the timing. He paused. It's 55 pages now. She looked at him. Marcus Webb. 17 years, 3 combat tours. The man who had walked backward out of the canyon so his team could move forward, who had fired twice at an angle he'd identified in 3 seconds to clear Olivia's path to the helicopter, who had offered to write an account at a conference table when a 2-star needed evidence and a junior captain needed a voice she didn't know she had yet. Webb, she said. Hayes, why did you offer that first night, in the debrief room? You could have said nothing. I thought about it. Not because the answer wasn't ready, she could see it was ready. He thought about it because he was deciding how to say it accurately. Because I've been doing this for 17 years, he said. And in 17 years, I have never seen what I saw in that canyon. Not once, not close. He paused. And because the people in that room with the folders were going to reduce it to a protocol violation, and I was not willing to let that happen. It almost did, she said. Almost, he said. Almost doesn't count. She almost smiled. He almost smiled back. For what it's worth, he said, the account says exactly what happened, every second, and it says it clearly enough that nobody who reads it will be able to reduce it to anything other than what it was. What was it? She asked. Not fishing, genuinely asking. She had been inside it, and sometimes the people inside a thing cannot see its full shape. Webb looked at her with the steady evaluating quality of a man who chooses his words the way a sniper chooses a shot, one well-placed, not wasted. It was one person, he said, doing the right thing at every moment when it would have been easier not to. 3 days of documenting what nobody wanted to read. An hour of keeping 12 people alive. 4 days of building the case that fixes the system so it doesn't happen again. He paused. That's what it was. She said nothing. The account says that, he said. Clearly. He walked back toward the team room. She stood in the corridor. Briggs asked to see her on day 5, when he had graduated from the recovery room to a chair by the window, and was doing the specific work of a person whose body is healing faster than the medical staff expected and slower than he would prefer. She knocked. He looked up. "Hayes," he said. "Briggs," she said. She sat down across from him. He looked at her for a moment with the direct, unembellished quality that she had come to recognize as characteristic of Viper Team. The way they looked at things, they wanted to understand completely without performance. "I know what you did," he said. "Rodriguez talks," she said. "Everybody talks," he said. "This is a small base, and what happened in that canyon is not a small story." He paused. "But I don't mean the canyon. I mean after. The notebooks. The timeline. The 6 months of records." She said nothing. "You spent 4 days building the case," he said. "After spending 3 days on a ridge and 1 hour keeping us alive. You didn't stop." "The case needed building," she said. "A lot of things need doing," he said. "Most people stop when the immediate crisis is over." She thought about that. "The immediate crisis wasn't over," she said. "Not until the system that created it was understood and fixed. The canyon was a symptom. The mechanism was the disease." She paused. "You don't treat the symptom and go home." Briggs looked at her with something that was not quite the expression of a person who has learned something new, and not quite the expression of a person who has had something confirmed, but somewhere between the two. "Commander Cole told me what you said," he said. "On the helicopter. When he said he kept his word." She waited. "You said so do I." "Yes." "What did you mean?" She thought about it. "I meant that I told them what I saw," she said. 3 times. I submitted the reports. I documented the reality. And then when the reports were ignored, I made sure the reality couldn't be." She paused. "I keep my word. If I say I'm going to report what I see, I report it. If I say I'm going to document it, I document it. If I say I'm going to make sure the system doesn't do to someone else what it did to us." "You make sure," Briggs said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." Direct. Undecorated. The 2 words given exactly the weight they deserved. She held his gaze. "Get better," she said. 6 weeks. "Exactly," he said. On the 6th day, Ethan found her at the ridge. Not the operational ridge, not the 900 meters east, where she had spent 3 days with her rifle, and her notebooks, and her complete detailed knowledge of 40 fighters who didn't know she was watching. A different ridge. Closer to the base. High enough for the view, but not high enough to be anything other than what it was, a place to stand and think. He climbed up and stood beside her. She didn't ask how he knew where she was. I didn't explain. They stood for a while in a silence that had the quality of a silence between people who have been through something together, that doesn't have an easy shape, that resists the normal narrative of beginning and end, that sits in the body long after the events themselves are over. "Drummond is recommending a commendation," Ethan said. "I heard. Kessler drafted the language." "I heard that too." "It's accurate," he said. "The language." "I know. Does it feel that way?" She thought about the question honestly, the way she thought about everything. "It feels incomplete," she said. "Not wrong. Incomplete. Because a commendation is a document about one person, and what happened here wasn't about one person. It was about 3 reports that someone read and ignored. 2 observation assets who were reassigned for doing their jobs. Farlow's Q. Voss's committee. Mercer's 8 months of preparation." She paused. "And 12 people who went into a canyon because someone made sure they didn't have the full picture." "The commendation can't say all of that," Ethan said. "No," she said. "But the review does, and the protocol changes do, and Webb's account does." She paused. "That's the part that matters most to me. Not the commendation, the changes." "The direct reporting channel," he said. "The direct reporting channel," she confirmed. "And the distributed validation committee. And the separation of assessment from observation routing." She looked out at the terrain below. "Those changes mean that the next person in the field who sees something real can report it, and have it reach the people who need it within 6 hours. Not 72 hours. Not 60 to 70 hours sitting in a queue. She paused. 6 hours. Because of what you built in the last 4 days. Because of what the review found using what I built, she said. Kessler's team did the work. I just gave them somewhere to start. He looked at her. She was doing it again, the specific quality of distributing credit with the same precision she distributed everything else accurate to the last decimal. Not deflecting, but locating her contribution in its correct proportion of the whole. Hayes, he said. She looked at him. You are the worst person I have ever met at accepting that something is about you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then something happened to her face that was not quite a smile and not quite a laugh, but lived in the territory where both of those things begin. I'm a field observer, she said. My job is to see what's there, not to be what's there. This time you were both, he said. She looked back at the terrain. Yes, she said. This time I was both. A silence. The team, she said. Viper team. What happens next? Medical clearance for everyone. Briggs in 6 weeks. 6, she agreed. Then reassessment of the mission calendar. Drummond has paused all operations in the affected grids pending the routing system redesign. He paused. When the redesign is complete and the direct channel is operational, operations resume. With better intelligence, she said. With accurate intelligence, he said. For the first time in 14 months. She absorbed that. 14 months of operations planned on a false picture. And now the picture was going to be real. I'll be in the field when operations resume, she said. It was not a question. Drummond said 60 days, Ethan said. I know what Drummond said. He looked at her. You're coming back to the field. I was never leaving it, she said. This is where the work is. This is where the picture needs to be built. She paused. The system is fixed. The channel is direct. My reports will reach planning within 6 hours. She turned to look at him. So when the next 40 fighters position themselves around the next canyon, the next team walking in will know they're there. Ethan looked at her. 17 years. 3 combat tours. Every firefight and debrief and mission planning session and after-action review that had produced the specific particular version of Ethan Cole, who stood on a ridge in Afghanistan, with a woman he had met 4 days ago, and felt completely and without reservation that he was standing next to the most competent person he had encountered in his career. The team, he said. When we're back operational, Drummond has offered us a support reconfiguration. I know, she said. Soren told me. We'd be requesting you as our permanent Overwatch asset. I know. You'd have final say on all observation assignments in our operational grids. I know. And direct reporting authority that bypasses every queue and every committee and goes straight to mission planning with a mandatory 6-hour response. I know, Ethan. She had used his name. Not Commander, not Cole. His name. He noticed. Is that a yes? He said. She looked out at the terrain one more time. At the canyon system below where 6 days ago 40 fighters had built a trap that was supposed to be perfect. Where 12 men had survived because she had spent 3 days watching what nobody else was watching. Where the gap between what the intelligence said and what the field showed had finally become visible in terms that no one could argue with. She thought about the ridge, about 11 rounds and a geometry problem, and the specific moment when the calculation resolved and she made the choice. About 3 days of ignored reports and 1 hour of making sure they couldn't be ignored anymore. About 4 days of building the case that changed the system. About 2 observation assets getting their records corrected. About Briggs saying thank you with exactly the weight those words deserved. About Webb's 55 pages. About the direct reporting channel that would mean the next field observer, with accurate intelligence about 40 fighters in a canyon, would have that intelligence in front of mission planning within 6 hours. She picked up her rifle case. It's a yes, she said. She walked back down toward the base and the work that was already waiting, and the 60 days that would pass, and the system that would be rebuilt, and the field that would be there on the other side of it, exactly as it had always been, uncertain and real, and full of things that needed to be seen accurately by someone who was willing to stay on the ridge long enough to see them. Captain Olivia Hayes had spent her career doing one thing. She saw what was there. She documented it completely. She made sure it reached the people who needed it. And now, for the first time in 14 months, the path between what she saw and what those people knew was clear, direct, and guaranteed, because she had not just survived the canyon, not just saved 12 lives, not just built the case that exposed the network. She had fixed the system that made all of it possible. And that was not the end of her story. That was where the real work began.